Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to the March 12th Village Board work session. We have a very full agenda this evening, so I will initially turn to my colleagues on the Board of Trustees. I'm sure that someone has either some reminders or some announcements for us this week. Who would like to go first?
I'll kick it off as I usually do. Good evening, everyone. Really good to see you. So the first message is the consistent message of the census. We need to be filling out the census. Why? It is money for our community. It is money for roads, for schools, for ensuring that businesses are coming here, seeing how many people we have. Being counted is something that is safe, takes about 10 minutes to do, and is really beneficial to the community. So please complete your census. We also have, I want to give a shout out to Jamie. I don't think we do this enough. We do it every now and then, but not enough. A lot of thanks for the website that we have. Our village website is so good. Being able to search for things on there, there's so much information to house, and to have it be so easily accessible is a great benefit to the community. And there's one thing that I want you to do when you're on there is sign up for the weekly web blast. So this is an opportunity that usually is provided for folks to learn about the goings on in our community, and now has become one of the key vessels to have all the information that is coming in week after week about how you can get resources here in Austin if you need help with food, or you need help with things that are related to COVID-19, or anything along those lines. Has really become a clearinghouse of information that is constantly updated every week. Every Thursday it comes out. Sign up on the website. The last thing that I'll say is really good news on the coronavirus front, that it looks like the numbers of active cases, that number is going down. And that's a really good sign. At the same time, I want to ensure that we are not taking our foot off the gas. The only reason those numbers are going down is because of the behavior we are demonstrating as a community. And so continuing to wear masks when we go outside and are not able to be farther than 6 feet from folks, keeping your distance in general, staying home, all of these things, washing your hands, all of the guidelines we've been following for the past couple of months will continue and only become more important as the weather gets nicer and we are more and more tempted to be outside and in community. And so staying consistent is going to be really, really important. And that'll do it for me for tonight. Thank you, Mayor.
Any other trustees with comments or anything you want to announce before the meeting gets started?
I have nothing.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Manny or Rika? Okay, then I'll just do a couple of more updates, and then we'll hit the ground running with our heavy agenda. Trustee Lopez was talking about the number of new cases going down, and that is very good news. Today we had only 4 new cases since yesterday, so that's a much lower number than we were hearing for so many weeks. And we know that having more and more testing is going to be essential for us to be able to have a phased reopening. We were just talking about Jamie and the amazing work she does. She's just sort of giving me another update. She updates the COVID late daily map now. So Jamie and I get these emails. Did we get an email late this afternoon because the last thing I got was the file share? Great. So then, Jamie, do you mind getting on the air telling us how many active cases? Do you know? I'll give you a second to look it up.
I just need to look it up.
Okay. Well, while Jamie's looking that up for us, it is all part of this ongoing theme about the importance of having testing up to the capacity that we need to really know how many cases there are out there in our community. Austin was one of the communities that was at the forefront of testing thanks to our open door here in our community. And so we've known for a long time many of the people who have been tested positive, and we now are seeing that private doctors are more and more allowing their patients to come in to be tested, to find out if they have the virus right now, and also the antibody testing. We're seeing that more and more. I don't believe that's yet available at the open door, but I know that it will be soon. Meanwhile, if you have a private physician and you're interested in getting an antibody test or having the diagnostic test to find out if you are positive, you may be able to get that from your regular doctor now. It's becoming more available, which is very, very good news. Jamie, do you have an update for us?
I do. So there are 98 active cases in Ossining. In the whole county, there is 2,234, and in the state, just about 340,000 altogether.
That's great. Thank you. And what's great about it is not that there's 98 active cases, but we've gotten to less than 100 active cases. So just this time last week, we were well above that. So that's a clear indication of the slowing down of the rate of transmission. So that's very good news. And hopefully that means that we're doing such a good job with our social distancing and with our practices of hand washing and hand sanitizing and wearing a mask anytime that we can social distance, that when we do get to that phased reopening, that we will be able to maintain a low rate of transmission so that we will be able to continue on the path to reopening. This week, 3 regions in New York State opened up. They had reached all 7 of the benchmarks that they needed to be able to reopen with phase 1, which is largely manufacturing and construction, and a couple of other industries where there's less chance of contact. We're not there yet in the Mid-Hudson region. We hope to be in the next week or 2. So we will certainly keep you posted as what we hear from the governor. That's not up to us in Ossining. It's quite a few levels up above our pay grade. So hopefully we'll get good news from the governor that the Mid-Hudson region is meeting all of those benchmarks in the near future. And with that, I think we're going to probably get to our agenda, which Karen is. Should I turn it over to you? And will you be discussing the item that I'm recusing myself for right away?
That is correct.
Okay, then I'm going to tune out. I will just be watching like everyone else in the community.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everybody. Thank you. So I'd like to start this just by giving a brief background. We've been talking, the board has been talking about the DPW site development for over a year now. And our new planner, Jaime Martinez, who has significant planning and economic development experience and had the fortunate experience of starting with us on March 16th rather, so he hasn't seen much of us in person, but has seen a lot of us on Zoom, will be leading the discussion of what the next steps are. Before we get to that, though, I would like to say that this has been a long and considered process. It was a process that recognized that there are many needs in Ossining, and in a diverse community, we sometimes have diverse needs that sometimes can even seem to conflict. However, the basis of this project and what was included in the RFQ did include consideration of the need for affordable housing, the need for commercial development, the need for economic development, and the need to revitalize certain parts of our waterfront in the interest of providing benefits to the community overall. So it's something we take very seriously, and Jaime will be able to take you through a process that provides for significant community engagement in shaping what is now a concept to a project. So I just want to start with that and hand it over to Jaime now so he can talk specifically about what it would mean to go forward with this development project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. So first, I guess I will introduce myself to the general public who may be listening right now. My name is Jaime Martinez. I'm, as Karen mentioned, I'm the new planning director for the Village of Ossining. I started on March 16th, which, as most of you recall, is just a couple of days before the beginning of the pause here in New York. And so it's granted me a lot of opportunity to do research online, and unfortunately hasn't given me as much of an opportunity to get that out there in the field. Fortunately, though, I was able to, prior to the pause, visit this site, do a site visit with several members of the team here in the Village of Ossining. And even in my trips up here prior to that, this DPW site is one of the most remarkable sights, I guess you could say, for the village when you get off the train station. It's something that you can't avoid seeing, and so it's understandable that the village has found itself at a place where they're moving forward with making a change here on the site. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. I have prepared a presentation that talks a little bit about this site in specific, in general, the details about what's going on there historically, what's going on there now, and how we got to the point where we are in looking to identify the selection of the developer. So first, we're going to go into the site history. And again, if anybody has any issues seeing this on your site, just let me know. But first, going into the site history, it's a 3.3 acre site bounded by Water Street, Main Street, SEQR Road, and Central Avenue. The site is traversed by the Sing Sing Kill. It contains significant steep slopes on the eastern portion of the lot, and it has a contaminated brownfield site throughout it. The brownfield site, a little more detail on that. This site was basically used as a coal gas plant from the previous use has impacted the groundwater and soil on the site and areas that are down gradient with coal tar. So that means basically any sort of area where the water drains off to and adjacent sites are also affected by that previous use as a coal gas plant. Because of that, this site is subject to a New York State DEC voluntary cleanup agreement with Con Edison. And you can see this site, as you can see, this site, basically hasn't been used in any sort of significant capacity since the 1850s. It has had various uses over time, but it is a site that is incredibly difficult to develop because of that history of the coal gas plant. And you can see here where my pointer is. This area is where the site is. These two were these are part of where the buildings were, where the coal gas plant was. These buildings are no longer there. And then, later on down the road, there was more development that took place here on the other side of the Sing Sing Kill. So the current use, it's currently used as a DPW yard. As I mentioned, it provides somewhat of an unsightly first impression when you get off the train, unfortunately, because of the way that it's put together. And because of its use as a DPW yard, it prevents the extension of the Sing Sing Kill walkway, which you can gain access to at the community center, but you can't take all the way down to the waterfront because of this use that's right there. So you have to get off and then take the street as opposed to walking down the entire Sing Sing Kill. Now, getting into the RFQ process, which is essentially what kicked off where we are today. The beginning of this RFQ process started in February 2019. There was a public discussion at a Board of Trustees meeting back then, and as a result of that presentation and discussion, the village decided to engage Housing Action Council, which is a community organization in Westchester County that focuses on affordable housing, to prepare a request for qualifications for developers to develop on the site. That RFQ that was prepared by Housing Action Council was released in July of 2019. At that point, the RFQ was advertised on the village website, and outreach was done to specific developers, multiple developers, to try to get the best possible project and get good responses. That outreach was done by the Housing Action Council. At this point, I want to hand it over to Karen, who can talk a little bit about the sort of rigorousness. This process was very involved in setting up the parameters of what the village was looking at and kind of making a determination about why the village wanted this kind of a use on the site.
So based on the information that we had about the site, knowing about the density issues, knowing about the brownfield issues, some of the challenges of the site, what was required based on other studies in terms of density to address that, and also interest from the development developers who were interested in the site. We had several different developers had reached out to me while I was at IFCA, as well as board members. We looked at the site as Jaime mentioned, we had Homes and Community Renewal talk to the board, and we talked about ways that the affordable housing, mixed use, mixed income tax credit programs could potentially help on a range of things. So we were very concerned when we did the RFQ to make sure that there was awareness of the fact that we have an overburdened school district and that we don't want to put any undue burden on our school district. There was an awareness that we had a high tax rate, that we were looking for things that would help to, in concert with other initiatives, ease that, help broaden our tax base, but also drive commercial and residential, commercial and retail businesses as well. So we had a heavy lift in terms of what we were asking for developers. We also wanted community benefits. We wanted the extension of the Think Secure walkway. We wanted more connectivity to Main Street. Again, because we saw that as a way to drive some economic development on Main Street. And there were a number of things that the board asked for in the RFQ. And it was a pretty heavy lift. So when we had issued the RFQ and we had 9 highly qualified developers show up for a site visit and 8 respond, we were very pleased. And we met with them at the site. We took them with 8 developers to the site. And during that time, the board and staff echoed the same comments that were mentioned in the RFQ and the criteria and what we were looking for. And of those 8 submissions, through a fairly rigorous process, we were able to narrow down to 3 developers. The board was involved in that process, interviewed 3 developers, and we ended up, the board ended up choosing Wilder Walter Partners to go forward with. But it was based on the response to the RFQ that, again, was very thoughtful and deliberate in making sure that whatever the village did, it balanced the needs as best as possible of all people in the community. So from affordable housing to other issues that we know we need here. Not an easy lift, but we were very pleased with the response. So with that, I hand it back to Jaime.
Thank you, Karen. So just moving right along, this is not to repeat a little bit of what Karen said, but the RFP was released July of 2019, and responses were provided by multiple developers by September 2019. At that point, developers were interviewed in winter of 2019 by the RFQ Selection Committee, consisting of members of the Housing Action Council, village staff members, and members of the Board of Trustees. At the direction of the RFQ Selection Committee, references were at that point checked for Wilder Walter Partners, to really kind of look into some of the different work they've done and make sure that other communities are agreeing with the statements that they're saying about themselves. So outreach was done to many different communities, including Big Skill, New Rochelle, and others. Now we can talk a little bit about what a LADA is, because that's essentially the heart of where this discussion is going and the selection of the developer would be leading to. So to give some background information just for the general public and for any board members who may be less familiar with it, the LADA is a land acquisition and disposition agreement. And it's one process that the village can follow for the sale of real property, which means land in this instance, or buildings. There are other options that the village could move forward with, but they're not advantageous. The most the most common that you see is auctioning the property without conditions. And so the village could say, look, we have this land and we don't really care what happens here. So we're going to auction it to the highest bidder, and whoever will give us the most money, we'll take that. But there are no conditions that you can impose on a bid, on an auction. So whatever the person goes and buys, within the the context of what's permissible on the site, they can do with as they please. So in this instance, a LADA allows the village to control the development that results on the site because they control the site. So until they hand the property over to the developer who's going to build on it, they have a say in what comes through. So if the developer says, well, I can't build that, the village can always go back and say, well, we're not going to sell it to you. And that's why you want to go through the process of using the LADA to get projects like this developed. Again, there are some circumstances where auctions make sense, and there are some circumstances where it makes sense to do it this way. The village decided when they were going through the RFQ process that this was the best direction forward. Again, a LADA really is advantageous to the village, amongst other reasons, because it provides a forum for community input into the project, and it's more likely to lead to a project that is consistent with community goals rather than to hand over a site without any sort of development controls like that are come from the LADA process. So going on to the civic engagement process, I know that one of the biggest concerns about anything that takes place regarding the site is about the civic engagement, the community engagement process, and making sure that there's a real opportunity for the community to weigh in on this. So it was really important when we were putting this presentation together to clarify the various steps that are involved in this process, what's actually being discussed right now, which is the selection of developer, and how many steps there are throughout the timeline that include community engagement and opportunities for the community to weigh in, what can be talked about, what can be worked out over time. So that's what this section is all about. So again, the public process for this redevelopment began in February 2019. So we're now more than a year into this process. It's not been a lot of process that's necessarily taking place in front of the community, but the beginning of this process was in February 2019, and that did take place in front of the community, as well as the RFQ being submitted to the website. So it's something that has had a lot of community engagement and has had certainly engagement up to this point to get us here. There's a lot of studies that fit into the determination that the economic needs for the community were to create some affordable housing, to try to get the brownfield redeveloped, to try to find economic stuff. And so those studies included public process as well, which fed into the decision to put out this RFQ. Again, the continuing civic engagement process is robust, and there's, like I said before, it's going to provide the public with multiple opportunities to learn about and weigh in on the process in the future. And the review of this project will include 3 separate boards. That includes the Board of Trustees, the Planning Board, and the Environmental Advisory Committee. So starting back with 2019, there was the beginning of this civic engagement process was in the public discussion of the preparation of an RFQ. This took place in February of 2019. This is just the beginning of the process. And again, the public discussion of the redevelopment of the DPW site centered around turning it into mixed income affordable housing, which started at the Board of Trustees meeting formally as a public process in February 2019. This discussion led the village to hiring Housing Action Council to prepare the RFQ that the current developer, amongst others, responded to. And after an evaluation by the Housing Action, after the evaluation of the RFPs by Housing Action Council, the selection committee, after interviewing multiple people, recommended that Wildebaucher be the chosen developer for this site. Now, this is the phase that we're at now. It's the selection of a developer to negotiate a LADA with. That's the subject of today's discussion, and the result of this decision will enable the village to negotiate exclusively with Wildebaucher on the terms of the sale and the redevelopment of the site for a limited period of time of 180 days, which is 6 months, essentially, to negotiate the terms or determine that there is no deal to be had and sort of both parties can move on. Now, there are a few components of this that are open for discussion. There are others that really aren't part of the negotiation process at this point. Mixed income affordable housing was a part of the RFQ. The developer decided to, the developer essentially responded to that RFQ that the village put out. So that's not going to be a component of the negotiation. If the village felt like mixed income affordable housing was not the right thing for the site, then they shouldn't enter into negotiations with any developer that was part of that responding group, because they responded to a different application than what the village would want. But that RFQ stated that you wanted mixed income affordable housing. That's what they responded to. So that's not a component of negotiation. However, the size of the project, as well as any public or commercial amenities, including community space, expansion of the Sing Sing Kill walkway, a public garage, or any other items, are really going to be part of the negotiation. And that's where the details of the LADA come into play. The next step would be the approval of the terms of the land acquisition and disposition agreement. The village will negotiate directly with the developer on the proposal of this project. The details of this project, including public amenities, unit count and size, and commercial uses, will be influenced by the financing agencies, including New York State DHCR and Westchester County. And this is an important piece to note. I think that it's easy to come up with a wish list of all the items that you want, but at the end of the day, somebody has to pay for it. So those financing agencies, I think, are certainly going to be willing to pay for a lot of that stuff. But at the end, those costs have to be borne out by somebody. And if the terms that the village have are not financeable, then that project can't happen and therefore won't happen. Now, the result of this will create the text of what's going to go into the LADA. The details of the LADA must be available for public review prior to the approval of the Board of Trustees, and the LADA will form the basis of the special permit application that will start into the next step with the Board of Trustees. So the next step is the special permit to the Village Board of Trustees, and the project as detailed in the LADA will be submitted for review and approval. At that point, the Board of Trustees will undertake the public environmental review of the project pursuant to New York State SEQR laws. So that's the preparation of an environmental assessment form and opening discussion of the items that need to be looked at for environmental review, whether that's school children analysis, traffic studies, or any other items that exist on the site that need to be reviewed. Along with that, the project will be referred to the Environmental Advisory Committee for review of coastal assessment form per the requirements of the local waterfront revitalization plan. Again, that's not an option. As soon as this project comes in for review, it has to go to the Environmental Advisory Committee. The project would also be referred out to the Planning Board for site plan approval. All right. So the next step is talking about the Planning Board, which has site plan approval. The Planning Board will review the project for consistency to make sure that it meets all site regulations that are required under the Village Code. Planning may also choose to provide comments to the Board of Trustees in regards to the SEQR review, where the Board of Trustees will be lead agency. And there will be, during this process, there's going to be multiple public hearings that will be held over the course of the review of the application in response to comments from the public and the board to ensure that the board is satisfied that the public has weighed in and that those comments have been sufficiently addressed by the developer. Next step in the process are the public hearings on the LADA, SEQR, and the special permit. The Board of Trustees is required, in order to approve the LADA, to finalize the determination on SEQR and to grant the special permit, are required to hold a public hearing. Now, the Board of Trustees can choose to combine the public hearings into a single public hearing, but the Board of Trustees may also choose to extend the public hearing over more than one session. So they could extend the public hearings on all these matters up until they're satisfied to make a decision. So I would anticipate that this process will require multiple public hearings for the SEQR alone to get through this process. Another important piece of this is that the Board of Trustees will be required under SEQR to consider any correspondence that comes in through the mail, as well as any emails they're submitting as correspondence to this project. And the important part of that is that it means that residents do not need to attend this in person to provide their input. And I know that that's a big concern. It's always great to have things be equal. If in the event that the village is not able to, in 8 or 9 months or a year, when you would have these public hearings on the site, in the event that they're not able to do that in public, in person, they would still be able to engage in this process. And I would assume that within 8 months, we're going to have a better sense of how to maneuver the post-COVID world. But if things continue to move forward as they have, before any of those decisions are even made, it's most likely that we will have, returned to some form of public forum at that point. But who knows? Another thing that the Board of Trustees can do is, because the fact that you own the site, the Board of Trustees can require the developer to augment the normal public engagement process to include a more robust community engagement, such as presentations at a community center, virtual site tours, or any other form of public engagement process that they think is important to make sure that this process gets the proper level of attention that it needs. This is something that I've done, on a personal level with sites in previous work that I've done. 2 different occasions where developments had come forward. Developers prepared a presentation off-site from where the proposed project was, brought in community members, showed them how the project would work, got a chance to meet the developers to get a better sense of what they were interested in doing, and ask questions in person. There's a public component to all this, right, where you have to do public hearings, but there's also, I think, an interest for people to be able to kind of peruse it at their leisure and not just have to listen to somebody who's sort of dictating it at a presentation. And that's the usefulness and the utility of having one of these separate presentations where somebody could go up to the community center and just kind of nosh on some snacks and read descriptions and ask the architect who will be there, or ask the developer who's there, or ask any other engaged individuals about the project to get a little more information about what the plan is. It's something it's a part of the community engagement process, and I find that it's very helpful in my experience to do that, especially where people are concerned and have questions about the project. The next step would be the conditional approval of the sale of the property. One of the comments I heard from one of the trustees today actually was, what happens if we agree to this and then they don't do anything? And so, upon completion of the public review of the SEQR process, the village would vote to approve the special permit in the LADA. But the village can choose to make the sale conditional on construction financing to ensure that the site is developed as proposed and not flipped. Essentially, the village can choose to condition it on the closing of the sale. So, there's a lot of financing that has to line up in any project. This would be, a state-funded project, a county-funded project. And so for an affordable housing project, these closings all kind of takes place simultaneously. People go down to Manhattan. There's attorneys for all the different parties there. There's, 50, 60, 70 different copies of contracts pertaining to different financing mechanisms that are part of it. And they're all there signing these forms at the closing. So the LADA could be finalized at that closing where at the same time that the financing is received from the tax credit investors or the financing from the Westchester County or whoever it is they're getting money from, the village is taking the money for the property, and the LADA is essentially tied to the closing of that construction financing. Once that construction financing goes in, the development has to move forward. Right? The county, the New York State is not going to give funding to a project and open up their books to pay for a project unless they are confident that that developer can get it accomplished and completed. And the LADA can be tied directly to that process. Now, this last slide, I know I've been droning on here for a little while, so get into the last few seconds here. The approval, again, will require multiple steps. The step that we're talking about today, the very next step in this process would be the selection of a developer for 180 days in order to do proper community engagement and flesh out what the terms of that LADA will be for the project development. After that point, it goes into the process that would get the special permit from the Board of Trustees. You would have SEQR review and a negative declaration of adverse environmental impact if that's a result of that process. You would have the review by the EAC. You'd have site plan approval by the planning board, and finally you would have the LADA approval by the Board of Trustees. So that's the process. That's the site and the process. And if you have any questions, I will try to do the best I can to answer them.
Yeah, Jamie, Jaime, I have one question. That last slide, we go back to that last slide?
Yep.
Where, we put this time frame of 180 days. Everything that's underneath that 180 days, they're expecting to get done in those 180 days?
No. 180 days is basically you give yourself 180 days to develop the terms of a land acquisition and disposition agreement, which will be the project that at the end of that period of time, which could take 180 days, it could take less, but the result of that period will be an application for a special permit to the Board of Trustees. So none of the other stuff can happen until the terms of that LADA are completed. So you have the next option basically gives you 180 days to negotiate exclusively with Wildwood Barcher on the terms of that LADA, much of which you already understand, but some of which is still open to negotiation. And again, that 180 days ties you to nothing except for that you're going to continue with the discussion with this individual and nobody else.
So basically, that 180 days, we're going to be working on the LADA.
Yeah. And if at 180 days, if you determine that you don't like this plan and you don't like this developer, the 180 days are over. If you've done nothing, then everybody walks away. Now, I don't think that you should enter into an agreement to walk away from it.
Right.
But you don't have any obligation by selecting this developer to do anything with them if it turns out that despite best efforts, you were unable to come up with terms that were agreeable to all parties.
All right, thank you.
Can I just interrupt for a second? Since I just wanted the public to understand, this is a work session. This is not, there are members of the public on here, and I know we're doing it on Zoom, so I want to get this right. If you have questions, you can ask, but this is actually a presentation to the board generally. It's not a question and answer for the public, although because Zoom allows us to have you just put in some questions, we have a host. I guess the host is, Maddie, are you the host?
I think Maddie has made me the host briefly.
Okay. So you
Or
can
not-
take questions.
I'm actually the host. Sorry.
Okay, so
Yeah.
if you could take, so the mayor has recused herself, so if we could just follow, I'll go last as deputy mayor, I'll just run this part of it. We should just have trustees ask questions. If there are questions on the Q&A, maybe we can accumulate them and sort of figure out what we want to do, because it's a work session, not a legislative session. And if you could take the presentation off, that way we can all see each other. And you could just share it with us again when we need to ask for specific slides. Is that right, Jaime?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so why don't we do that? So, Bob, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted for people who are tuned into this to sort of just understand the process. So,
I understand.
back on, Bob.
That last slide seemed a little confusing. That's why I just wanted that spelled out. That's all. I'm good.
Any other trustees? I'm sure there are.
Sure, I guess I'll take over that one since that Omar didn't go first. I'll take.
That's a first.
Yeah. No, thank you, Jaime, for this. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff to catch up, obviously, and sort of like the briefing that you gave us as an overall picture is very helpful. So let me ask you a couple quick questions for now, and I'll probably ask you a couple more if my colleagues, they don't ask you what I think they may be asking you. So let's say if the board decided not to go with an RFQ process, and we decided last year that we were going to go on RFP. What is the main difference between an RFQ and an RFP at this level?
So if you have an RFQ, usually what that means is that you've decided that you have a pretty good idea of what you want to do on the site. You may not know everything within the four corners of what's going to happen on that site, but you know generally what you'd like to see presented to you. At that point, you want to determine amongst a list of qualified applicants who is the best capable to provide you what you have requested in your RFQ. If you ask for an RFP for this site, then what you would be doing is going out to developers and saying, look, we have this 3.3 acre site. what do you think you can do with it? You would go to all of those developers and you could get anything. So to give you some background, there are lots of municipalities that have sites that they can't get developed, and they haven't figured out any focus group tasks. So they put out RFPs for sites, and they know what they want, but they don't ask for it. And so the proposals that they get are not consistent, and oftentimes that yields proposals that are somewhat useless. The RFQ process at least allows you to make an initial decision to say, we think we know what we want on this site. So since we know what we want, we're going to put it out there and explain our vision to the developers. And we want to hear back from them to see whether or not they're capable of doing it. The benefit of doing it that way in this instance, and it's not always the best way to do it, but in this instance, the benefit of doing the RFQ is that you had developers who really kind of, took the pen to paper and figured out whether they could financially create something that was consistent with the vision that the village had put forward. And that yields, I think, in this instance, a better project. Because if people are sort of competing against each other, people can say, look, I want to do this, I want to do that. But their financing may not be so clear. Their capabilities may not be so clear. So they can propose whatever. Somebody could come in and say, I want to do a medical, emergency medical, site. I want to do a nursing school. I want to do all these things. And you say, oh, that sounds like a great proposal. But the process for them may not be so clear. In this instance, because there's so much state subsidy connected to this, the financing mechanism for this makes it a little easier for people to move forward. So then you get a chance to sort of evaluate, this person against other people who have similar experience building different levels of affordable housing to figure out whether or not, hey, I like the work that they did in other places. And I think that they can do it. They come highly recommended from, other municipalities who have done similar work. And so I appreciate what they're doing. You're comparing apples to apples. If you put out the RFP, you're comparing apples to oranges, essentially.
Thank you. So the next question is, I guess, because you did mention the financial portion of this project. What does it mean if it was a normal year, if this was done last year, let's say? Obviously, it will be a little bit of a different conversation right now. But because of where we are right now, what does that mean for the 180 days? Let's say we had previous conversations with the developer in regards to the money, but no one really has said we have well, maybe the county has in a way, but no one really has said we have the money. We're going to give you all this money to proceed with this project. Within 180 days that we have this preferred developer status, when do we know exactly the finances of this particular project may be headed? So that to me is one of the biggest concerns of what this whole situation, this pandemic is that the world is going through right now. I saw a couple articles this today in regards to the New York State is asking for $60 billion, I believe, for federal funding, for federal aid. So I don't know, I really don't know what the finances of even the state is right now and going forward with the project. I like the project. I'm supportive of the project, but I have a lot of concerns in regards to that, obviously. So when do we know?
I think that's a great question. I'm going to try to answer it in sort of a two-part response. There is if you go back a year and you look at the traditional financing of any project, every project essentially gets built off of credit. There is almost nobody that will come in and throw down $100 million or $50 million out of their own pocket to finance a project anywhere. That's just not how construction happens 99.9% of the time. Most people go to banks and they say, I have a project that I want to put forward. And they have to go to those banks, which are almost always very rigorous in saying, well, what are your projected incomes on the site? Are you going to make money from rent? Are you making money from sales, from this, that, and the other thing? What are your projected expenses? How much are you going to pay in taxes? How much is it going to cost for the construction of the site? Are there any additional challenges that haven't been thought of? And then those banks who specialize in construction financing will go forward and say, okay, we think that your numbers are good. We've had our underwriters take a hard look at this to make sure that it can happen. We're willing to give you financing. You have an obligation to provide this much of your own capital in the process, so that you have sort of skin in the game to make sure that you don't walk away from this project, and that we as a bank don't finance a project that's going to fail. In this instance, because it's a little different, it is a sort of publicly subsidized project. It has different income streams, but affordable housing is not like traditional, market rate or commercial financed projects. The funding that is used to pay for affordable housing comes from generally a few different streams. There is, in New York State and really throughout the country, there's tax credit money. And so the way that tax credits work is that banks are obligated to support affordable housing under the Community Reinvestment Act. That money is done through tax credits. That tax credit provides the money that is required to pay for affordable housing. Now, one thing that is important to note, that if affordable housing, in most instances, if it was built with private financing, it would lose money. It is not something that could be built without subsidy, and that's why there is such a massive tax credit program. That's why all affordable housing has to be pretty much without almost all the time has to be funded through public financing and some sort of public subsidy. So the tax credit program really doesn't change that much. There are slowdowns right now in terms of the funding because of the pandemic. I haven't had the opportunity to talk to any DHCR people, but in my experience in the past, the biggest challenge with financing this, even the best of times, is that you have to come in at specific scheduling rounds. So they have, closings that take place at certain periods of time. And so when those closings don't happen, they get pushed back to the next round of closings. So because you've had so many places closed, and a lot of the deals that are happening here get closed in New York City. So as long as you can't actually physically get the lawyers in the same place, there's no ability to file stuff with the clerk, all these things prevent any of these closings from taking place. And so that means that right now, from the start of the pause until today, there's a backlog that continues to get built up. Once the pause is lifted, that backlog will start to clear out, and projects that are in the pipeline will be able to move forward, and projects that are farther out in the pipeline that are just sort of in the indie phases will come onto line. So there's going to be a gap in the amount of time that it may take, but it's more of a mechanical problem, I think, than an actual funding problem. It's not that, banks don't have to continue, providing subsidies to tax credit programs. I don't think that's the case at all. I think the reality is that there's just that mechanical issue. Now, from the county side, you have money that comes in from HUD. That's federal dollars. So one of the easiest way for the federal government to inject money into industry, into jobs, is to provide funding through programs like home financing, which pays for affordable housing, and that goes directly into construction. So, in the past, in the stimulus that you had under Obama, lots of money went into different infrastructure projects, but also went into affordable housing. And even under this recent coronavirus bill, there's a lot of additional money that was put into the CDBG program to help specifically with coronavirus-related items. I think that looking forward, we haven't seen any diminishment in the amount of money that's come into the home program for years. I don't anticipate that that's going to change anytime soon. And honestly, it's possible that you may even see an increase in the amount of funding to the home program, because there's always a need for affordable housing. And it's an easier way to get money into the hand of contractors and developers, who are really some of the drivers of new job creation in the country. And that's something that's sort of recognized across political spectrum. So I don't anticipate, even if there is an issue, that it's going to be something that we're going to be waiting years for. I think that by the time that the process is wrapping up, if we do, the village does decide to move forward with this, by the time the process is wrapping up to end the LADA, they'll be well positioned to take advantage of financing that should be available at that point.
Thank you. So my last question again on this one will be in regards to obviously the timing as well. So we have the 160 days. That gives us about 6 months, as you mentioned. That all puts us
180 days, yeah.
ourselves to almost the end of the year. As we know, we have some members in the community, or even like the concern is the engagement on the public part. So so what does that picture look like going forward? I mean, it's difficult right now with what is going on right now. So I guess that question would be towards the developer of this particular project in a way where what is the plan that he may have if we decide to move forward with this particular case. But what does it look like? And if the board's not satisfied with the engagement and the participation of the public at that point, do we end the relationship before the 180 days, or do we have to wait until this whole thing is the 180 days done? Because I would hate for us to put the developer in a position where he definitely is going to be investing money on a project that at the end of the day we may say, you know what, this is not good for us, or the community doesn't feel that this may work for them. Or do we wait? Because right now, the state is supposed to be open up on the 16th, but we don't know that. There's the stages that we have to go through. Do we, what does it look like? I guess, I know no one has a crystal ball, but what does that mean for us in these times that we have a lot of unknowns? I guess, for everything, including our own budget. We don't know a lot of the stuff, what's going on.
I think that, I'm going to try to answer this as best as I can, but I think that, there's an obligation as a village to try to take the next right step, right? Small steps, incrementally towards progress, towards getting to a goal that you're trying to get. For this process, the next small step that you're able to take is the selection of a developer. After 180 days, if it doesn't work out, or if it's clear throughout the process that the terms can't be met that are agreeable to both sides, it'll make sense to part with. But at the same time, it's not a good idea to enter into a process that you are already, you've already determined should not be entered into. I think that, my evaluation of this site on a professional level is that it's a good project. In that sense, it is, it meets a lot of the criteria of what has been talked about up to this point. So it's consistent with the goals that I think the village has pushed forward with. And I think that it would be a good use for the site. I think that the fact that it's laid fallow since 1940s and has not been redeveloped, speaks volumes to the challenges that come with developing the site over the years. And so that's an important piece of the puzzle to be considered. So I wouldn't, say that it's a good idea to move forward with a developer if you're certain that this is the wrong use for that site and this is the wrong thing. It's not a good look for the village. It's not a responsible move, I think, for us to take. But that being said, if you do believe that this developer is the right person to begin negotiation with, then you just need to understand that that is all that you are making a decision on. You're making a decision on the next step. You're not making a decision on the project, the merits of this project, because although you have the outlines of what the project may look like at the end of the 6 months, you don't know what that project actually will be, because those discussions include not just the village and the developer, but they involve the financing agencies that would be funding this project as well. So that's the point where you determine, what are the next steps. So maybe once you come to terms on what the LADA is going to look like, that's when you take that into a more robust political, community engagement process. And you say, look, these are the terms of LADA. This is what we think is going to work, but we want to hear from the community and see how you feel about it. You go into that community engagement process. And if after the community engagement process, you realize, this is not the right fit, you haven't signed any contracts, you haven't moved forward with the LADA, and you part ways. Part of the risk of being a developer is taking the risk to to invest your money in trying to get projects developed. I can tell you right now, I know this developer's already invested a significant amount of money in just putting together this proposal, as did all of the other developers who were not selected. So that's just, part of the process. But you don't want to get caught up on what could happen 6 months down the road. You still are in the driver's seat in determining the terms of the negotiation for the LADA and determining the kind of community engagement that should take place moving forward. You can ask the developer what their opinion is on how to do the community engagement, or you can really dictate to the developer, this is the kind of community engagement we need to do. And I think while it's still kind of early from an online engagement process for us sort of post-COVID, we are starting to learn some things. We know that people are online a lot more than they used to be. So while Facebook and Instagram were things that people used before, people are really actively on there, spending much more hours. There's quite a few studies that talked about sort of the jumps in the amount of time people spend on these online forums. So we do know that there's a way to engage people without actually engaging them in person. So that may be part of the process. And if the pause changes, we could be looking at a situation where in 4 months, we are having public meetings where, somebody shows up to a public hearing and they're handed a mask and they're invited to come in and they take part in the process. We don't know what that looks like, but we do know that things have changed just in even the 8 weeks since we started with this pause.
Thank you.
No, thank you, and that's very helpful. And again, I was supportive of this project last year, and I think this is something that part of what a lot of the elements that meet that criteria that we all agree on this process and moving forward. So thank you for all that.
Rick, I just have one quick question. So, Jaime, when does the trying to say this? Say we picked a developer. When does the clock start for him to look into financing, and knowing that he's going to get this financing from the state or from the county? When does that clock start? After we pick them?
I think it's an iterative process. I mean, so he's already begun engagement with the financing agencies for this project. There are a few things that are important to note about public financing. One thing that you will never get from a tax credit entity like HCR is you'll never get a letter saying, I guarantee you're going to get this money. They won't ever do that. They'll give you a letter saying we support your project. They'll talk to you through the process. They'll demand you get a letter from everybody else. They'll never give you that letter. They'll schedule a closing, or the day of the closing, they'll sign and say, okay, now you're getting your money. So you have to go through that engagement process from the beginning. They've already done outreach to HCR. They've already done outreach to the county. We've done outreach to the county to talk to them. Well, I haven't personally, but I know that Karen has spoken with Norma Drummond from the county to talk about the availability of financing for this project. So they'll all say informally. But the thing I think that is more important than getting those guarantees ahead of the process is getting those guarantees through the LADA process. So the LADA can be tied directly to the closing of that construction financing. And so if you say to somebody, look, we're going to sign this LADA, you have X amount of time to get your financing, or we're not going to move forward with this LADA. That's how you do that. And so, you understand the sort of impossibility of getting guarantees from entities who don't give guarantees. They only sign contracts once they're ready to sign contracts with all their underwriters and everything else. They go through that process and get them to that point. And that's really all you can do. So, we control the land, and that's without the land, you cannot build a building. So that's really important, right? And without money, you cannot build a building. Everybody has their own piece. So as long as we're all working towards that closing date, we're working towards that point in which HCR and the county and everyone else is putting their money on the table and saying, okay, we're going to buy it, we're going to invest in this, we're going to do this, and the transfer of this property doesn't take place until that happens, then that's the way you ensure that the project moves forward.
All right, thank you.
Omar, do you want to jump in?
I'll jump in. I'd be happy to. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So thank you, Jaime, for the presentation. super informative, really detailed, really appreciate it. I've done a bunch of research on this land, and one of the things that I couldn't find is how it became a brownfield property to begin with, and so I appreciate that nugget specifically because it's not one that has been widely available. So and I realize my internet may be a little unstable here, so if it's difficult to hear me, let me know. My comments are this. So I recognize, first of all, I want to say that I am really supportive of this project. It's meeting a lot of the needs that the community has. Not only, we spend a lot of time talking about affordable housing, and it's definitely part of it because it's a mixed income development, but it's also mixed use. I think that has not taken up enough of this conversation. It's an opportunity to have not only retail, but also a community space down near the waterfront. It connects the waterfront to Main Street. Like you've mentioned, Jaime, extends the Sing Sing Hill walkway. There's a lot of great things. And in addition to just being one, the beautification of a part of our community, one of the first things that you see when you enter our community from the waterfront. So recognizing that this process has been going on for a year, there was a long period between February and August, really, where there wasn't a lot of activity with this project. And it then started up again in August and now in 2020 in earnest. And as this has become much more part of the public conversation, there's a spectrum of expression, a belief that people have about a project like this. On one side of the spectrum, you have folks who are against the development of any kind of housing, period. There's no Prezi, no PowerPoint, no Google Slides, no document you can show folks that are on this side of the spectrum to convince them that there should be housing here. These folks believe, period, there should be no housing. Then there are folks that believe we should have housing, affordable or not, we just need more housing. They'll point to housing studies and so forth. That perspective exists as well. Then there are a lot of people in the middle who may say, well, I think it may be interesting, but I'm concerned about taxes, or I'm concerned about schools, or I'm concerned about traffic, right? Just look at 9A, it's going to be even busier. Or I'm concerned about the environment, or whatever it is, whatever the concerns are. Those specific concerns are going to be raised over the course of the next 180 days at the very least, and really throughout this process. And the developer is going to respond to those and say, here's how we can accommodate to meet those concerns. In my understanding of the situation, looking at the final package, which will be a compromise across all of these different elements, it should address a lot of the concerns that these folks in the middle have raised and create a project that is going to be a net positive. If a project is a net negative, environmentally, fiscally, educationally, or in any other way, then I certainly wouldn't be supportive of it, and neither would the board, I would imagine. But the reason that we're here in the first place is because we believe it's going to be a net positive. So, given that, I am certainly in favor of moving forward with the process. One of the concerns that has been raised generally is, well, look at the timing of this. We have coronavirus going on and all of this. Shouldn't we wait until we can meet in person? Well, the reason that I would, and that is a criticism that I take to heart, and it makes a lot of sense to me. And I was one of the main people a month ago when this was first on the agenda that said, before we move forward with Wilder Balter as the preferred developer, can we put the pause on this for a second? We're at the height of coronavirus. Folks are not paying attention to this. Let's give it a little bit of time. And so we've given it a month, and the numbers are going down. And of course, there are people in our community still being affected by this economically and health-wise, but is not where it was a month ago. And I'm almost done. So the reason that I bring that up is because as important as it is to recognize the time period that we're in, it's not as if the world we were living in 4 months ago or a year ago, where we were to have public sessions where people can comment publicly, it would be easy for everyone to go. If you have childcare issues, if you work nights, we have these meetings Wednesday nights. If you can't come because you're working, it's tough, right? You can email your thoughts, but it's not the same as showing up in person. And so all of a sudden, what the environment we're in has created is an environment where some of the folks who would usually go in person wouldn't be able to, but also where some folks that wouldn't be able to go in person can because they are home. And so we find ourselves with a different mix of people who are able to participate. My hope is that as many people as possible do participate, and I think we'll be able to tell over the course of the next 180 days at the very least, if not the entire process, whether that is true or not. My sense is that it is true. If it wasn't, we wouldn't be moving forward with a lot of the other priorities that we have. And finally, this will be the last thing that I'll say, and you can respond, Jaime, or not to any of this. But the last thing that I'll say is that we are now entering a phase of the coronavirus pandemic where we're looking at what reopening looks like. And for a lot of states, that means what immediately does it mean we can have barbershops open, restaurants, concerts? Like, what does reopening mean? One of the elements that I would throw in there is that reopening should not just be a conversation about what do we do immediately. Obviously, it should be that, but also what are we going to be doing to set ourselves up for what the world will look like post-COVID? And a part of that is if we're saying we're going to wait until there is a vaccine and you can have 50 people in a room together with no fear of catching the coronavirus, and that's the barometer that you're measuring anything of substance with that requires public engagement, then we're going to be delaying the amount of progress that we're able to make in our community by a really long time. And the people that are most vulnerable to that are the ones that tend to be the least able to advocate for themselves in environments like this. And so my push would be to start this process in the world that we are living in, because it's moving so quickly. We don't know what it's going to look like 3 months, 6 months, 2 years from now, and do so knowing that we prioritize public engagement. We want it to be a net positive for our community, and that ultimately this is a project that we are in favor of as long as it makes sense.
Yeah, I think that was really well said. I think it's important to note that the taxes, the tax rate that so many people are concerned about doesn't get any better when nothing moves forward. And so the only way to really move forward is to try to put forward projects that are a net benefit, a net positive for the village. And so this project has been evaluated up to this point. An RFQ was put out that the village believed would yield a project that would create a net positive impact for the village. It's important to actually see what the terms of that deal will be, so then you can evaluate it on those terms. But doing nothing, right? Doing nothing is just a decision that states that the status quo is okay, right? That in itself is a decision. And so what I think has been clear from what I've ascertained from people is that the tax rate, the high taxes, is not okay, and that is the status quo that the village has to work towards addressing. And so this is part of that process. It has to be evaluated. I think everybody kind of is on the same page that it has to be evaluated in those terms. And the decision on what the village, what you as a board do here is going to be based off of whether it is good and in the best interest of the village or not. And if it's not, then you won't move forward with this and you'll do something else. And if it is, then you will move forward with this project. But doing nothing, right, saying we're going to stop here, doesn't change that fact. In 8 months, if we wait until there's a vaccine, we don't know when that's going to happen. Then that means that's time where that tax burden has not changed at all. Nothing has changed. And so that problem, which is so preeminent on people's minds, has not improved at all, at least not as a considered as a piece of this project or as a piece of development. And so it's important to not lose sight of it. I think you don't want to make bad decisions, but you don't want to stop in your tracks either. It's this analysis paralysis is what we call it in planning. But we don't want to enter into a phase of analysis paralysis in the village where we don't know. We think we don't know what's going on, so we can't make any decisions. And I think that I think your points are really well made and well taken. So.
Thank you. Omar, is there any more that you wanted to add?
No, thank you.
Okay. So, and we can keep talking about it. So, I agree with everything that has been said, and therefore I don't really find it necessary to repeat it. It's taken a little bit of a different turn because the conversation tonight is not, with all due respect, about going forward and doing nothing. That I think is a comment that I would take issue with. The issue and the conversation is that we, and I think it was Manny, and I think it was actually maybe all of us. The history is that last year there was a unanimous board vote to move forward with the project. The timeline that's stated, although we always state these timelines, and it feels like if you say February of 2019, that for an entire year, lots of time was spent on it. There are periods, as Omar had said, where things are done, and there are periods where, you know, when you do other things, right? I mean, we meet once a week, and other projects are going on. So the timelines are important, but they have to be in context. The other context is tonight's meeting. It was fantastic. Haim, I think, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, it's like a 10 because it is rare for us, and we haven't had a planner in a long time, that can, and really in what I consider to be eloquent yet simple terms, explain what an RFQ is, what an RFP is, you know, the process, the history, as Omar had said. There was a nugget there about the contamination that I myself did not know either. He didn't know it, so really great stuff. I learned something new every Wednesday in every one of these meetings. It's actually the most pleasant part of being a trustee for me. It's just been phenomenal and stays with you for many years. So that's why I highly recommend it. People become trustees. I think it's a fascinating lesson. Having said that, I don't think that the issue is whether we're going to find a solution to a pandemic next week or in 6 months or in 12 months. My guess is that we will never find a solution to pandemic viruses like the common cold, which has been around forever. We haven't solved for the common cold because it's not always solvable. I think the issue of exhaustion on the part of a community that is typically highly engaged when it comes to these, not controversial, but highly engaged in anything to do with public space being used for something. This is not about putting a bench park up. And even that, by the way, took us a year to go through 3 committees to figure out how to do that. Just want to like put that out there, having gone through myself. And I think that no matter how much you engage the public, there's always a group of people, and Omar didn't say this, so I don't want to repeat what he said so eloquently, just to add, so that, you know, I don't need to hear myself talk. I just listened carefully to what everybody said, and I just want to add to those pieces, okay? So the thing I would add is that, and Omar was right, about a month ago, when we decided to move this another month, we didn't know actually that we were at the height of pandemic until probably today. You don't know when you're at the height of something until you see it decline. So we didn't know we were at the height a month ago. All we knew a month ago is that we were in the middle of something pretty horrific and we didn't see the ending to it. Frankly, we're not seeing the ending to it now. What we're seeing is an end to death, a total reduction in death. We're not seeing people who are spouting back up because they have jobs, because they don't. More and more people are actually losing their job. We're not seeing people being able to take care of their children in a proper way. We're not seeing a comeback to anything yet. One could argue the economic part of this is actually not at the peak yet. All to say that I think people are thoroughly exhausted right now. My feeling, and we would need a majority vote, this is a work session, of whether we will vote so that next week this will come up in the legislative session. I believe, Hyman, that's what we're actually talking about today.
Yes.
Correct? Okay.
Yes.
So just, again, for the public, I mean, I think the trustees know that. When I've spoken to trustees, except for the mayor, who, while involved in the vote last year, is recused himself now so that the public understand, because this is being recorded. I know people will be looking at this video. I know they'll be cutting pieces of it and sharing on social media, so I just want to make sure that things are being said for the public record, because your presentation tonight was fantastic. So much so that I think people will go back to it, including myself, more than once. So that's why I'm going through this. For me, there is a level of exhaustion. And I'm fortunate that I have a job, and Jaime, you're fortunate because you have a job. But there are a lot of people who are exhausted. And the good news, if there is any from all this, is that people who didn't like technology and did not use it have now been forced to get there. So we should be able to do more public engagement online. I do, however, believe that things of this magnitude, not laws about fees and structures, not about, whether we should do this road or that road, which is a big part of what trustees do, to be honest with you, but things that involve public space need to be done in a format where the public can be more engaged and not at a time when they are at full on exhaustion. For my part, if the ask tonight, first of all, the point was education tonight, so we got what we needed. You've already accomplished what we had asked for. So as far as I'm concerned, already a successful meeting. Again, the second part is an ask that we vote to move forward, not on this sort of the steps that you laid out, and to move forward with legislation that we would vote on next week. From my perspective, I don't feel that this is the right time to do that, because I think not only we've gotten a few emails, but we get a few emails about lots of stuff, almost everything we do. But even before those emails, there were members on this board that really conveyed a concern for how much the public can really understand what's going on. Not those of us sitting around this conversation who are engaged, but people who are living their life and whether they really understand the magnitude of this project. And because I don't believe that we have hit the height of the pandemic, and I'm not waiting for solution, because I'm pretty sure if we can't figure out the common cold, we're not going to figure this out. What we're going to do is figure out how to live through it. That I am not, and it'll be a vote on this board, and no one who's spoken, and I do have to ask the other three folks here, I don't know, Omar, if you're saying that you would like to see this legislation come up tomorrow. We all agree, 3 of the 5 of us had voted that we are supporters of this project. For me personally, that has not changed. I'm a supporter of this project. I voted for it. I'm still voting for it. I don't think the timing right now is right. And the reason we delayed it by a month is to see where we are now. In my opinion, we are still not there. And I want to table this for now, and the clock will start when the legislation comes. So I don't think Mr. Balter is out a whole lot, because I think Mr. Balter, I think he's on the call, by the way, and he can email us, his own opinions, is that this is about timing and about process. And what I've learned as a trustee is timing and process are actually really important. They're as important as the quality of a project. I don't want anybody to sit there and think that we rushed something through or did something at a time when people are thoroughly exhausted. So my ask of the other trustees is to delay this or table it for another month till we see where we are on many different levels in this community. I sound like I'm shaking. I'm hearing myself talk because it's freezing in my house. Sorry about that if I sound a little bit weird on the phone. That would be where I would like to go with this. And I need to ask my colleagues how, thumbs up, thumbs down. I can't see all of you, I'm sorry, of where you want to go. I feel like Omar said he wants to bring this up in legislation, but I don't think I heard Bob or Manny give that, and I don't want to speak for Omar. So I just need to hear from my colleagues what you want to do, because the ask is to bring this to legislation and vote on it next week.
I'll jump in there. A month ago, yeah, it was bad. And a month later, we're in better shape. We're not out of the weeds. I tend to agree with you, Rika, to table it for another month. And hopefully we progress in a better situation, a month from now. That's my feelings on it. I happen to agree with what you said. We're in better shape a month later, but we're not out of the weeds. I just don't think it's the right time right now. and that's my opinion.
Manny?
Yes. So I'm gonna kind of take what Omar mentioned before. So he wants to move forward for next week. So my ask will be for us to obviously I'm a supporter of this project again. I voted for this last year. I'm still there today. So I guess looking at my calendar, we can either a month from now will be more like June 17. That will be a month from now. Is that where we are heading? And we can ask Stuart and Karen, and obviously to have that part of the legislation, or we're looking at more towards June 3rd. That will be the first meeting of that month on the legislative portion.
I
It would-
think the 17th would be about a month, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So we
Is that
basically,
legislative?
from understanding you're asking for them to have the legislation. We don't need another tutorial, but
No.
you know, we've learned a lot tonight. We just want to, so on the 17th to have legislation put in front of us at that meeting.
Correct.
Okay. I'm good with that.
I mean, and I think at that point we'll have a better understanding of what a month from now we'll see what this pandemic and has done and where we head, and I think I will have a little bit more. I'll do more research, and obviously we'll keep watching what's going on around us in regards to this situation that the world is going through, and I think we'll be able to make a better decision at that point. A fair decision for the developer and for the community.
Well, I think it starts the clock going. And for me, because we did this tonight, which I think was helpful in the sense that now members of the public who are interested have the ability to calmly, like, sort of look at, what did you call it, I guess? Oh, did you say tutorial? I guess it's somewhat like that. We'll be able to. No, that's a good term.
It's a presentation, and they can go back and look at the video. But I can also give the presentation and allow people to view it on their own.
I think it's good. I think
Okay.
it's good because it gives them a month to chew on a little bit and go back to the presentation or the tutorial and be a little more informed of what the process is, because a lot of the thought process out there is, oh, they're just going to go build this building, and we can't express that enough that that's not what this is about. We want to build a building, but we want to go through the process, which includes the public. The public needs to understand that. This is why I feel 180 days, whatever that is, where are we going to be? Nobody knows. But I think tabling it for another month, having the legislation prepared, we're all got our ears to the rail of what's going on out around us. We'll be a little more informed by then to be able to, vote on that night.
And I think the public will have a chance to look at this rather than voting now and just giving them a week. So I think I don't see a downside to it, frankly, is my point of view. So we're getting 3 votes, and Omar, you would rather do this next week. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, well, here's how I feel about it. I would like to get some clarification from Eureka. So I would be fine, just to put it out there, I'd be fine waiting a month to put this on a legislative agenda. But my question would be, what would need to be true then that is not true now that would make you vote yes? And the reason that I ask that is because I do take to heart what you said about the community being exhausted. That's also kind of an ephemeral, it's a feeling, right? So I don't know, like, I don't have a way of measuring how exhausted the community
Right.
is. I just get a sense from, like, talking to people I know and reading message boards and whatever. But I don't have a clear sense of that. So it could be that in a month, I don't imagine that a pandemic that has gone on for 2 months, people will feel rejuvenated by month 3. My sense is they'll probably be more exhausted. And so if our barometer for moving forward is, are people exhausted or not, they will continue to be exhausted. And so I would just like to know what would need to be true in order for you to say, despite the pandemic, it does make sense to move forward with the legislation because whatever conditions are met.
Okay, great question. So for me, things are moving very quickly. And so I think literally there is sort of a time frame where the governor makes announcements, and they tend to be in 2-week intervals. So between now and a month from now, we're going to see things opening. We're also going to have people who, while a month doesn't sound like a lot, I actually think it is, given how fast it's moving. People will be, in fact, discussing reopening. People will be more focused. People will make more adjustments to what's going on in the summer. People will have the ability, including us, as just members of the community, not as trustees, will also have a little bit more of a footing, in my opinion, to see where the state is. To Manny's earliest question about funding from the state, which is this is very dependent on, and where the state is going and the county and all that. Because right now we've got a lot of people who said a few months ago, yeah, there's money out there. That was one of the reasons that we moved forward with this, is that we were told there is money out there. All we were told is there's money. There's really very little in writing. And I think in a month, there is a very clear direction coming from government agencies about what needs to take place, and a little more of a gain of the footing, if you will, about budgets. And, I look at it as, for me, and I'm not speaking for the other gentleman on this call, so you asked me, so I'm answering the question. I think a month makes a big difference. And I also see no downside to it, is the other issue. If there was a downside to this, I think 3 times about it. But because I don't see a downside, and I do think a month is a big difference in what government decisions are made and what is being opened and what we can do and what budgets will look like, and whether the state really will have money, because right now all I'm hearing is they don't. And all I heard from George Latimer is there's a deficit and there's no money. And a lot of this is coming from public money. As that is a big difference for me. So I do think a month, one hand, I see no downside. On the other hand, I see people catching their footing, because where we are today from a month ago is also very different. So I think a month is just not that big of a deal to wait. To also see if the state and the county do more than just say, yeah, we got you. Because, yeah, we got you at a time during a recession, the last recession we had, all of the financial promises made by the state of New York, the city of New York, and the county sort of didn't happen. So I'd like to get a little closer to going from promises to, yeah, the money's still there. If you recall, Omar, that was one of the things we as trustees were told. There's lots of money out there for this. The question you should be asking, really, me, if I were you right now, is why would you think a month is enough? It's because I really want this project to happen that I'm believing a month will be enough. Somebody else may say you really should wait longer. But again, this is all a balancing act, and we do have a little bit of, but we just heard George Latimer the other day, and all he said is how there's no money, and how things, unless they're obligated by law, there won't be money for it. This is not a secret that I'm sharing with the public. It's in all the media, it's in all the write-ups, it's common sense. And for any of us that have been through a recession, this is exactly what happened at every recession. And that part is part of the exhaustion I'm talking about, in addition to the literal physical exhaustion that people are going through. That's my rationale. I don't know if it makes sense to you, and it is a feeling. There's no data here.
Manny, and I know that Jaime may have, and Jaime, please do respond to Rika, but I'm also curious to hear after you finish from Bob and Manny, if their answer to the questions, what would need to be true a month from now in order for you to vote yes on this legislation? Please, Jaime.
All right, so I don't want to get too much into the details of what would be true. That's a political decision that the Board of Trustees really needs to make. But I do want to talk a little bit about what happened during the 2007 crisis and the stimulus money that came in for projects. I'm not sure if Ossining had any projects that were funded under the stimulus that came in around the time that Obama came in. But there were a lot of projects that were funded. All of those projects, almost universally, were projects that had detailed information about how that money could be spent and could be put into use right away. And the reason that they did that was because it was critical to fund projects that could be, essentially spent down right away. People needed money, they needed jobs, and they couldn't give money to a project that was 5 years down the road in the pipeline.
Shovel ready.
And exactly, shovel ready. So you do remember this, great. And so I was trying to explain it really cogently, but yes,
We all
shovel ready
read.
projects.
This is like history here.
And so the importance of not waiting too long in any project is that you do want to create shovel ready projects. You have a few things that are going to be public amenities likely to come from this project. One is a public garage that would be a component of the precast garage that's going to be built on the site to support that site, commercial, and then any other uses. But there's also the Sing Sing Kill walkway, which requires public funding and financing to pay for that. Those are projects that need to be shovel ready if any funding does come down the road for this to be useful for coronavirus funding that may be coming, could reasonably be expected. So you don't want to wait too long because the longer you wait, the longer you risk not having any projects to be funded under a future stimulus. That really probably will happen at some point soon.
Right, but you're not saying. I mean, I'm
not saying I'm not saying you can make a decision
I mean,
next week.
I think when you move from being a planner to discussing that, I think that becomes. I would just say that not actually exactly the way I would have said it, and I've lived through it. So, and I think the people who live in this community, who came from the city and all that, also have other recollections of how the government dealt with things. But be that as it may, the answer to Omar's question, because we're like at 9:02 right now. So Manny and Bob, do you want to sort of bring this home? If you want to, you don't have to answer the question.
No. Of course. And again, so kind of going back a little bit of what was said early today, we hold off making a decision to just bring up this conversation a month ago for two things, sure. One, we didn't know what was going on around us, the situation and the economics and the finances and the health around our community and our world. Two, we had asked Jaime actually to prepare something like this in regards to the process, what an RFQ is and what does that mean. So we did that. It was done today, and we still see, it was mentioned obviously that the numbers are not raising like it was before, even like 3 weeks ago. But to me, it's not really. I want to have some sort of we want to be some sort of in a stable situation in regards to what it, how do we move forward. And I think a month from now, that will be a little bit more clear on what that means for our state, our country, and around ourselves and what's going on. Obviously, we don't control what other municipalities and what other governments do. We kind of control what we do here. And I think a month from now is it's going to be a different conversation. And I think, and I don't want to speak for anybody or my colleagues in here, but it could be a yes or it could be a no. But it was going to be a reasoning, behind that. And again, I'm supporter of this project, and I think a month from now, it's not going to hurt anything what was going on.
So, Manny,
about this since last year. So
yeah, I just want to clarify, Manny. So my question, because I think we're in agreement that we'll wait the month. My question is, I just want to fast forward. Let's pretend it's a month from now. If because you said you were in agreement with Deputy Mayor Levin that the community is exhausted and the timing isn't right, which is a point that I understand. And I was making the point that is there a way to either quantify that or how would you can you be more specific in what you're looking for in terms of determining whether the community is in a place that it will be able to participate in a way that you would feel comfortable with?
It's not even about the relationship and how do we going to engage the community itself. As you mentioned before, we are moving forward. I believe we're moving forward with the comp plan. And my recollection is you had doubts. You have a 5% doubts in moving forward with this. How do we do that? You were positive at 95%, but the other 5% was like, yeah, maybe not.
That's right.
So so again, so it's the same way. Sure, I don't have an answer for that. you know, I've been through a process where, you know, controversial projects have gone in front of us and people have come out. You know, community members have, you know, have made their voices heard in a lot of the ones. I could mention a couple of them, but you know, it's already 9:05, so I don't want to keep moving too much of our time in this. But you know, I think it's more, to me, is more like what the finances are within our state and this whole project.
Can I just,
To
I'm
understand
sorry.
it better. That's all.
Can I just say one thing, because I've had a fair amount of experience with state projects. So in this case, you're going to go through a period when the clock starts ticking, is obviously up to the board. The same way that if you cannot come to an agreement about the LADA, if the money's not there, then that also will impact the project going forward. So the advantage here is not waiting till the money is available for this type of project, because if you wait for that, there's 100 other projects that have started and are shovel ready, you will lose that opportunity. So there's really no harm, no foul in starting the process independent of understanding, because none of us know what that's going to look like. And even in the best of situations, when the grant programs are flush with funding, they don't guarantee anything. So that is something that will happen or not almost regardless, and timing that is very challenging. The other thing is, and I'm going to just ask Corporation Counsel, the time that we set for the engagement period of a preferred developer is variable. And I believe that regardless of when you set the clock, if you were finding that public engagement was not moving as quickly, or people, that you could extend that time period too. And that also may, you know, so there really isn't a downside to, you know, you have latitude to set that as well. So I just want to say there's more options, that you don't have to wait for all these pieces to fit in together to start the process, and then make sure that the engagement is going appropriately, whether you do it now or in June. But I think there's, you know, we just want to keep that straight. You would have, and Stuart, you can correct me if I'm wrong, if you wanted to make this, you know, a longer period of time, that would be possible.
There's no reason you could not extend it. I just want to correct something that the board members have been saying. This will not be legislation. This is simply a resolution.
I'm sorry,
to
you're right.
do that, because
Right.
there's a big difference between the two.
Yeah, sorry
But
about that.
The answer is that yes, if the board and the preferred developer wanted to extend the 180 out to 210, 270, whatever, the answer is that you could absolutely do that.
Okay, I
So,
think,
Bob, which way are you
yeah,
going?
I think, well, I just want to make one comment. We're in a month's time. Yes, the state has made progress. We have made progress, but we're forgetting the elephant in the room. This could pop right back up in our face in a week or 2 weeks. You know, that's my concern. And then now we're pushing it out again. And I understand everything that's being said by Karen. I get it. I just feel, you know what? I think we wait the month and we have it, you know, we have the resolution put in front of us.
Thank you. Sorry, thanks for correcting the language. I was thinking legislative session. So it sounds to me like the majority board is tabling it for now and will revisit. It sounded to me, I'm looking at my calendars, I'm doing this June, was it 13th?
17.
17th? Okay. Guess, Madam Manager, we can go on with the rest of the agenda, if I'm not mistaken.
We can. Hi, Mayor. So the next conversation, we are going to be discussing the fee schedule for building and planning, and we had talked about this a couple of weeks ago, and we wanted to adjust all the fees at one time. So I'd like to have our Director of Planning, Jaime Martinez, and our Building Inspector, Joe Agustinelli, who I hope has been able to get, yes, there he is. They're up next, and I'd like to turn over them to to discuss building and planning fees.
Joe, you want to kick it off? You're still muted. There you go.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, good evening.
Good to see you.
Yeah, so these are basically the same fees that we brought up when we back in the fall when we were doing this for the new budget for this coming year with us going on Simprosity. So basically, the fees are the same increases where it's for building. It would be we're increasing the fees for building permit fees to $25 per application, and $15 for anything that is being submitted for electrical, plumbing, smaller types of permits. And we're adding that to the fees to basically compensate the cost for the new program for Simprosity. So there's no change from what we proposed originally. At that time, it was just stated that we would wait until actually Simprosity was ready to be used before we would increase those fees. So rather than where we actually just waiting for the board to approve the increase of the fees.
Yeah, just to kind of echo what Joe said, the Simprosity comes with a transaction cost. And so in order to keep this proposal, to keep our fees and the cost of Simprosity in general cost neutral to the tax base and to the tax levy, it was important to implement these additional fee changes so that we could offset any increased costs for the transaction fees that come with every Simprosity application. So that's really the heart of this. Other than that, I believe there are no major changes to the fee structure except to accommodate the additional $15 and $25 fees for the individual, transactions that are taking place.
Oops. Okay, do folks have any, trustees have any questions with the building fees we'd kind of already reviewed? Was it 1 week, 3 weeks ago? I've lost track now. But this is the first time we've had an opportunity to talk to Jaime or to hear from Jaime on adjustments to the fee schedule for planning fees. So now would be the time if you have any questions. Otherwise, I think we're probably going to move forward with this for next week.
Yeah, I have one question. Is either Jaime or Joe, is the system up and running? Are we at 100%?
Well, we're taking in all building permit applications. The building, electrical, plumbing, they're all they're right now where people are submitting for that. They're still working on portions of it for the planning department, but we're hoping that that's going to be ready for them to also get applications submitted to planning soon.
Okay.
So then, can you explain if we change the fee schedule for building and planning? I mean, we obviously want it to coincide with the Simprosity because it's really a reflection of the additional fees with the Simprosity. So if the building permits are up and running, then we certainly want to have the updated fees that are going to be able to balance out that additional cost. What is the timeline that we can anticipate for the planning access for Simprosity? I'm concerned about raising the fees. I realize this is kind of an easy time to do that because there's not a lot of permits that are being issued right now. But can you tell us what is the timeline? How well can we expect them to coincide for planning?
Yeah. So the change in fees will be felt immediately by any applicant that comes to the door, whether those fees are being accepted through Simprosity or whether they're being accepted through the means that we're using right now, which is to send an invoice to the individuals and have them pay directly to the finance department. So those fees will be conferred immediately upon approval of this legislation. However, the fees for the planning Simprosity is up and running on a certain level, but is not where it needs to be fully ready to go. We requested and we're told by Simprosity that this was going to be ready, I want to say at least 2 weeks ago, and it's not. So I would expect it's imminent. Hopefully it will happen within the next day or so, but we'll reach out to them again. But from the consumer side, it won't change anything. As soon as the fee schedule is changed, the new fees will be applied. We have had a couple of planning applications come through.
Have those applications gone? They haven't gone through the Simprosity system yet.
They can't.
Because that's not up and writing. Yeah, okay, so I understand that when we change the fee schedule, that those are the fees people have to pay. I just, the reason why we're changing the fee schedule is to be able to absorb the additional fee that comes with Simprosity. But if what you're saying is that you thought it was going to be done 2 weeks ago and it could be done by next Wednesday, then perfect. My concern is if it's going to be a month, 2 months, 3 months, then it's not appropriate for us to change the fees to pay for a service that doesn't exist yet. And I know that as far as the public's concerned, it doesn't say Simprosity fee, but we know that's why we're changing the fees.
I don't. It's not going to be another month. We've been working with the programmer on a daily basis. I call him every day to get updates. They're currently working on trying to get the applications for planning and zoning and HPC and BAR completed so they can start using it. He and I are going to have a conversation with him again the next day or so to see where we're at with that. But I feel they should be ready. I wouldn't say more than about a week or so. It's not going to be a month because they, ironing out any of the, they have to adjust it to make it work for the way we work in Austin. So there's always a little bit of adjusting to be done because different municipalities ask for different types of forms and different stuff they want submitted. But I don't think it's going to be more than maybe a week at best.
Okay, that would be perfect. So,
Yeah.
Other questions, Rika?
No, I don't have any question. The timing, actually, we discussed it. Thank you.
I actually do have two quick questions. One, I guess I'm looking at the fees and the environmental quality review, which is page 8 out of 15. I guess it changed from it says reference to New York State regulations from what 2019 was. 2019 was 1/10 over the 1% of the cost review. So I guess who's getting the money and who does the environmental quality review?
Perhaps I can answer that. The state regulations set forth exactly how much that fee is. Depending on the type of project, it's either 1 or 2% of the construction cost. That, if the village does its own environmental review, you can do one of two things. You can charge for doing the review, or you can charge for reviewing the review that the developer has done, which is the usual case. You can't charge for both. But the 1/10 of 1% fee is not consistent with what is in the New York State regulations. There will be when we get back to having our public hearings, there will be a sort of cleanup bit of legislation which will clean up that particular chapter of the code, which is chapter 118. But this would be money that would go to the village. But it is a fee that is specifically set forth in the New York State regulations.
So if I'm an applicant, I'll be able to obtain those regulations online, or that's something available on our building department or planning department?
I'm sure that the planning folks would have it. They can absolutely also get it online. It depends. Again, it's for residential, I believe it's 2% of construction cost, and I believe for commercial it's 1% of construction cost. And the state has a particular formula for determining what the construction cost is.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Stuart. So I guess the last question that I have on this one, and I'm okay with this. So thank you, Jaime, to going over this and keeping the 25% throughout with working with Joe. I appreciate that. But my question, I guess this one is for Tom. Tom, you there. So how much money have we paid to Synchronicity, and what is the deductions that we are getting from Municity at this point? Because since that we are going to be drawing back of using one program and one software, where are we with this, with the money wise? Are we following part of the contract that we have with them?
I am not aware that we paid anything to Ciprosity.
Is that correct, Karen? Because I'm pretty sure I thought I saw an invoice a couple of weeks back in regards to that. One of the vouchers was for that.
I have to go back and check. I don't remember. I don't remember seeing one, so I'll double check. I haven't seen one, so Tom, maybe we'll just double check tomorrow. But I don't think we have.
Okay, what about Municity? What are we doing with that one? Are we still using it? Are we still using it 100%? And if we're not using it, can we take off? What is the process for us to eliminate, I guess, the contract that we have with them? What will be the next steps on that end? Because that becomes a budget process, sure.
I just to answer that, I would prefer that we stay with Municity for not for a long term, but for a short term until everything on Ciprosity is up and running properly, because we still need to make sure that all the data is being transferred properly. And there is an overlap time where at some point we're still entering stuff, permits that have come in over the last couple of months and we're not taking in originally on Ciprosity. So I don't want to go back and tell applicants that submitted, say, a month ago, and they're just waiting to get approvals, whether it's through a zoning board or they're just waiting for revisions from an architect that was given revisions to correct the plans, to have them go back and now enter through Ciprosity and then pay an additional fee to Ciprosity. We're not doing that. So until we clear all of that through, we're using Municity because all of that information was entered through Municity to begin with. So there is a little bit of an overlap time, but I would say in the next couple of months, we can probably terminate with Municity once we get everything completely straight with Ciprosity. But just to go over what was the fees, I guess, to Ciprosity, if I remember the contract that was submitted was that they gave us a price which was supposed to include data transfer to their program and training. And it was supposed to be broken up over 3 years, so it was 3 payments. So I'm not sure of the exact fees, but I believe it was something like the entire cost was $16,500, and we were supposed to be paying them, I believe, in three payments over the next 2 years. So if they haven't been paid the first payment, which would have been about $5,500, it may have been paid already, but that should have been the first payment they're supposed to be getting at this point.
Okay. All right. No, thank you. So I guess Karen or Stuart, in regards to Municity, and I don't know how the payment works for them. Obviously, do we pay their contract for a whole year at once? Is that divided in the quarters? If we're not going to be using obviously the program until the end of the year, and if we have paid them on total for their service, are we going to get any money back if we don't use them until the end of the year?
I'll have to get back to you. I don't have the answer right now.
Okay.
Yeah. I have to look at the contract too, so.
All right. I appreciate that. If you can give
No
us
problem.
an update on that one, that'll be helpful, please.
Okay, any other questions from the trustees before we move forward with this and cross our fingers that we're all ready to go next week with all the elements of it? Yes, go ahead, please, Trustee Lopez.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Jaime. I have 2 questions. One is in the resolution, I see building and planning fee changes. But when I look at the fee schedule, there were a couple PDFs that the village manager sent us with the fee schedule that was adopted, but specifically the non-metered lots are in there highlighted as a change. And I know we're going to be talking about municipal lots and metering. Is that why it's not part of the resolution as it is written?
Oh,
I'm sorry, can I address that?
yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Other things that were highlighted in yellow were fee schedule changes that were adopted when the budget was adopted back in December, but they're still highlighted because it's a change in 2020 from 2019.
Got it. Okay, thank you. That's clear. And number two is, I don't know if this is possible, but ideally for me, it would be great to have what the difference is in fees. So if it's $125 for structures under 600 square feet, that's and it used to be $100. Having plus $25, so that folks looking through it know where, like, how fees have changed. What was the old fee? What is the new fee? Either putting it in the resolution itself or just somewhere that would be easy enough for people to see what the difference is in fees would be helpful. I'd love your thoughts on that. Not all at once.
Tom, since you raised your hand.
If we're talking about the fees for planning and zoning, and if you want the difference, I can show that. If you're talking about like the entire fee schedule, if you want to know what the changes are from 2019 to 2020, and if you want me to add it,
I meant the former, not the latter. So not all the fee change, just what we're looking at, what's on the table right now for building and
Just the building and planning ones,
yeah,
because we've already done the resolution for the other ones. So.
Correct.
I can add that in on the actual resolution itself, insert it into the respective box that shows how much of an increase it was from before. It's either going to be the $15 or the $25.
Okay, that'd be great.
Sorry, Omar. I just want to interject. This is a sort of a constant theme for 2020, that when we get reports of any kind, fees, really anything, that there should be this year against last year. And this is another example. We've been sort of talking about this, that when we get information, it should be in context, is the way I would put it. It's helpful to the trustees, and it's helpful, I think, to the public, so that you could see a change from one year to the other, negative, positive, the same, whenever we vote on things, or even as we get data and information on a regular basis. Context just seems to be more helpful to understand.
Okay. I think you have brought that up in a number of other contexts, Trustee Levin, and it sounds like it's going to be pretty easy to achieve in an updated version of this resolution for next week. So thank you for that, Tom. On this particular topic, are there other questions or concerns for our staff? Okay. Then let me ask Stuart, the next item on the agenda is local law 3 on escrow accounts. Are you going to be asking any of the staff in particular to help weigh in on that? I'm thinking maybe Jaime Martinez.
Jaime probably, yes.
Okay, all right. I was just wondering about the order of things. It definitely makes sense to do that next then. So then it sounds like we're ready for next week for the planning and building fee schedule. Thank you for everyone for that. And Joe, as far as I know, you're welcome to continue with us or you don't have to, unless there's something I don't know about, Karen. Or can Joe go enjoy his family for the evening if he would like?
Joe can definitely go and enjoy his family, and thank you very much, Joe.
All right, thank
No
you.
Islander game on.
Have a good night. Stay safe, all.
You're welcome to stay, of course, but it was a pleasure. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, so with that, Corporation Counsel and our planner are up to just in our theme of planning tonight. Local law number 3, escrow accounts, and he's revisited. So take it away.
Thank you, Village Manager. Folks, we've discussed local law 3 before. There were very few substantive comments last time it was discussed. The one question that was open and I think needs to get resolved is The legislation as it is now written has the Director of Planning on consultation to determine what the escrow should be for land use matters. As I indicated in my emails, which I resent to you folks today, many of the jurisdictions actually set the escrow and put it into the fee schedule as a set amount. And generally with most of them, it's, unless it's a very large project, it's usually a $5,000 escrow, subject to the discretion of the planner if he thinks that in fact it needs to be higher for some reason or lower. But I think it's important for the board to make that determination so we can proceed with it, because if it's to be a fee if it's to be a number that appears in the fee schedule, that will need a change in the legislation that's been drafted. It's not a major change, but just would have to be changed. And then if the board wants to go that way by setting what the amount should be, then the question really is what that amount should be. And, and that's really what the subject for discussion is tonight, not as much the substantive nature of Local Law 3, because that was previously discussed with the board.
Okay, does anybody have any questions they want to kick this conversation off with? Manny?
Thank you, Victoria. So thank you, Stuart, and thank you, Jaime, for this. I really don't have any additional questions. I see the fees. I went over the emails with Stuart had. I guess my concern is obviously it goes back to a little bit of what the process is. Sure, there's been several conversations that I had with Stuart and some staff members and some board members on an offline setting since last year, and the process, how to streamline things. I think, to me, if we are going to move forward with this, because a lot of these things, kind of may fall under the 1 and 2 families part, that kind of takes place. So, we are raising the fees. We are, we've been raising the fees for the past couple of years, and I totally understand the reason why. We're eliminating different services that we have done for the community, but I want to make sure we are working, to minimize a lot of this stuff, a lot of the repetitive stuff that goes on sometimes in some of the application part. So I think this will help. It's still not clear to me in regards to the implementation on this, but I guess I will have to look at the application, because all this has to change in application. All this has to change on the new way we're going to be doing things on how do an applicant does an application. Either if it's a homeowner or an architect or a developer, all these things have to change. So I want to see all this in a better context, and probably in a month or so, maybe 2 months from now, and have a better idea in what that means. But I'm in favor of all this. I have no really any questions on this. I didn't have any questions before. I just wanted to, maybe if Jaime can guide us or tell us a little bit more of the process and what he was thinking on, how does he see this process helping the planning department and obviously the building department at the same time.
Yeah. So I think the important thing for the village to do is to provide a sort of a clear path forward, and there I'm not extremely familiar with this process. I know that Stuart has looked into it. I know that Port Chester a few years ago updated their fee schedule for escrows based off of a set of parameters that they kind of understood because the amount that they were setting up for their site plan review and everything else was just kind of insufficient. And I believe, conversation with Stuart, that you looked at Port Chester a little bit in the process for putting this together amongst other municipalities, correct?
That was one. The legislation itself is primarily based upon Village of Mamaroneck, but Port Chester was one of the ones that I looked at, correct?
Yeah. So I think that I think that the number sounds like it's probably pretty good. I still need to get a stronger sense of the details. I do also realize that, we've had applications that have come to us just recently where there's, the evaluations that we need in escrow that's this high, and then the applicant comes back and says, I don't want to do that, and blah, 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 and they're fighting over it. I think that setting that fee schedule right out front makes it a little easier for you to have the conversation. Say, look, this is just an escrow. We're not saying we're going to spend it all, but we know that, this is the starting point for us. And it gives me the leeway to determine if for one reason or another that site is particularly challenging, is going to need additional money. It can be raised or even in some instances lowered as needed, but it sets a benchmark. I think that's helpful for anybody who's coming in trying to build anything. I do understand that their homeowner is concerned, but the escrows are set not for the homeowner who's coming in to put a deck up. The escrows are set for new construction, I believe. So we're not talking about your average homeowner that's not savvy about this process. We're talking about professionals.
No, correct, and I agree, and that's the reason why I said the 1 and 2 families, and that's sort of taken out of the equation. And I do want to thank Stuart for bringing this up, and I do want to thank Stuart Cromelli from Keller Sessions, because I previously I had different conversations with him, and early in the year in regards to what the process and what this looks like. So again, I'm in favor of this, and I think this will definitely help streamline a lot of the stuff that we have and the struggles that we have gone through, our staff has gone through, and a lot of the things. So I have no more questions.
And I think I would add something anecdotally, and I'm not trying to put a little, delay in the discussion here, but I think anecdotally, internally, we've had a lot of conversations about process and trying to find ways to make things a little smoother. And it's clear that, amongst all of us, there's a commitment to making sure that the process is as efficient as possible. We can't predetermine what's going to be the outcome of the decisions that various different boards make and everything else. But what we can do internally is clean up the process so that we're not wasting time. And we're not, on one end, wasting developers' time or homeowners' time, but also we're not being negligent in our responsibility to properly review these applications. So trying to meet that goal, stay as efficient as possible.
I'm going to hold you to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody, the mayor had to leave for a minute. So does anybody else? I don't have any comments. I think this is all good, all part of what we've talked about. Anybody else have anything else to add? And Stuart, did you get what you needed from us?
Unfortunately, folks, no.
Right.
I don't
that's
know.
What I thought.
The purpose was to see what you wanted to do. Do you want an escrow amount put into the fee schedule, or do you want the legislation as it is now, essentially giving it on a case-by-case basis with the director of planning on consultation with others? That's really what I'm, wanted to find out what you folks wanted to do.
Okay, so Jaime, I think the question I would ask is what makes more sense to you as the professional in the room so that we can answer the attorney's request?
I think benchmarks are better. I think that.
Couldn't hear you. I'm sorry. Say that again.
I think that benchmarks are better. I think that it's super positive at the beginning with the benchmark numbers. I believe you mentioned like 5,000 as one of them, and then larger sites having different escrow numbers. But I think those benchmarks are better because it eliminates the need for haggling at the beginning for an escrow fee, and it also protects us a little bit down the process if we get into something that. It's clear it needs a lot more review than we thought, and we asked for a small escrow and we didn't ask for enough, and then we have to potentially interrupt the process or let the process of review continue without having money in our hands and putting the village at risk. So I think we should charge those fees. I think we should have the benchmark set. I do agree with that rather than
want the fees,
totally protected.
Again, you would recommend the fees be put into the legislation, or and not go case by case? Is that my interpretation of that?
Yes.
Okay. So I am fine with that personally. That would be where I would lean. Anybody else? Because that's what Stuart needs from us tonight.
Yeah. Thank you, Jaime. And I believe that's what I was trying to remember, and I don't have my notes in front of me, but I believe that's what Joe from Keller Sessions also mentioned. Is that correct, Stuart? Is that
That is what a number of the places where Keller Sessions works, North Castle in particular, that's what they do, yes.
So
Okay.
I'm good with that. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Bob, you're good? Omar, I can't see you.
I'm good.
You're good. Okay, so we're all good.
I'm good.
Stuart, now did you get what you needed?
I did, everyone. Thank you. I will revise and have it back for you for another look over. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. Village manager, next on the agenda.
Okay, next on the agenda, we have, and Jaime, I think you are done for the evening, so thank you so much. We've held you here a long time, so if you'd like to stay, you're always welcome, but if you would like to go, that is fine too.
I think my kids would like to see me, so
I'm sure they would. So go
Tell them
enjoy.
Tell them to watch
I'll be
this
seeing you
video.
next week.
You will.
This discussion. So.
All right.
Bye.
Take care. So one of the results of the lockdown is it's changed the nature of how we're doing our municipal parking lots, who's needing them and who doesn't. So we our clerk has looked at this and developed a solution, temporary muni lot monthly tags to accommodate people who are now home during the day who were previously not using the lot. So with that, I will turn it over to our clerk, Suzanne Donnelly.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope you can all hear me. As I sent in the memo, and also I'll read it I won't read it for the public, but we'll talk about it. Right now, a lot of people are working from home. So we sell day tags and we sell night tags for the municipal lots, especially downtown. This has nothing to do with the programs that we discussed at other meetings of revamping the program. This is using because a lot of the people that work downtown are working from home, and a lot of people that live downtown are working from home. The people that live downtown only have night tags. So we are asking you to approve a monthly muni tag for $23 a month, as long as you and the clerks and everyone and the lawyers and everybody think it's appropriate to keep it going while people are working from their homes that are living downtown. Right now, if they don't have a day tag, they're looking for parking spots on the street, down the roads. They're sending them up to parking lots that are very far away. So we would like to do that. And on top of that, really begin vigorously to starting up the muni parking. We work on a rotation basis right now. We're trying to change that with the new program, but we have not finished that yet. So we would like to have people that were supposed to be renewing in March and April, to start them again renewing their muni, whether it was a day, a night, or both. Some people have both tags right now in the current system. So we would be asking to start doing that. We are closed. We are officially closed, the building, but since the clerk's office is right next to the door, we have been assisting on taking in the mail, the packages, some water, they can throw their water bill into a bucket. So we can do this too by doing it through the door as we're doing now. We want to remind everybody that right now the offices are not taking cash. Please come with checks or money orders or a credit card if you have to. So that's what we're asking the board to consider: a monthly day parking pass during the coronavirus crisis.
So I'm trying to understand what our desired outcome is. From what I'm hearing, the whole place is shut down, right? So all the cars are there. When you drive through, everybody's parked. What would be the difference between this and just not ticketing people for the next month?
Well, they're not legally parked there, but
Right.
It would make them be legally parked in the parking lots, whereas the other people aren't, and it's a revenue stream.
Yeah, but that's, I understand. It's work. It's people coming. It's people in our community. They all either work or live here. It's just we have a lot of projects. If the goal is to make it convenient, because people are sort of stuck, right? They're neither going to work, nor are they redoing. It's we do this like we used to do this at Christmas, where we could just as easily. And first of all, I'm assuming not a lot of tickets have been given out. The courts are sort of closed to collect these things. I understand it's a revenue stream. As people who know me know that this is like one of my topics, is making sure that budgets are done well. But it's more work, it's more staff work at a time when people shouldn't be moving around so much, or according to the governor, unnecessarily, except for essential businesses. This isn't actually an essential business.
Well,
And if you just didn't give tickets for X number of weeks, because we would determine, we could say it's a month, we could say it's 2 weeks, we could say people still have to renew. That's not the issue. But they could renew it by coming in a month or two from now. They would have, if they had to renew it on March, bad example, on April 1st, and they didn't, and they come in June 1st, just for the sake of discussion, they would not start on June 1 for next June 1. We would have said to them, because of coronavirus, we wouldn't expect you to walk in here, but you're starting June 1 and you're ending on March 1 of next year. That's a 1 year. And I'm using a year just as a time frame.
okay, that's
Wouldn't
not
it be
yet.
easier is the question.
Well, I think that we have gotten complaints from people that have day passes that there are no parking spots down there. So if you at least have people paying for parking spots, and if you get to a point where you do start monitoring what's going on down there for the people that have paid for their parking spots, it would be better if we had people that were working downtown to be able to park there legally in their parking spots. Right now, they're not, I know that they're not giving out tickets most of the time, but they have. But it would be something that we thought that it would be a good time, that we're at this point in the recovery of this, that people should start paying for their muni parking spots. They've already gotten, people who were in March and April got a spot, got a couple of months where we told the people just to leave the stickers in their cars. We're also part of this program where we're looking for new ways of doing this whole parking system, where it's actually down to the car level, not this random card that sits in the front of your car. We are just giving people parking permits until December 31st, because the new program will start in no later than the first of the year. But we thought of this as a time in the whole thing that we could give people the comfort that they were parked legally, and that they could go and find a spot, that if they were working from home, because the people that are they're usually working there with their day passes, a lot of them are working from their homes, which is not Main Street in Austin. So we were looking to start up that whole system of the muni parking again, and that's where we're going with this.
So I have a question. I have to presume that, okay, we have people that are working from home, but there probably is people that purchase day passes that are working at an essential business that
Right.
go to park in that lot, and all of a sudden we've given out all these people that are there usually at night. So, I mean, do you have a rough percentage of, I'm sure you've gotten complaints, so there's got to be a percentage that there's an overlap.
Well, the current system of muni parking has more parking, people with tags than there is parking spots, and right down in the downtown area. You can go to remote parking lots and things. So, but we have, we're trying to make it as easy as possible. We've gotten a ton of complaints from people that live downtown that they would like to get a pass to park downtown during the day, not in the 3-hour lots and not in the meters, and plus the businesses are complaining that people are parking in the meter spots all day too. So We were just trying to set up a system that was as easy as possible for the people down there. And that's why we came out with this monthly tag. We don't normally have a monthly tag. We have a 6-month tag and a year tag. And in some cases, we have a quarterly tag, which is something that has to be all redone when we do this whole program. So we were just trying to make it easier for people that were down there, that live down there, so that they could park, plus start the whole process of having people renew their muni tags.
Madam Clerk,
Mhm.
this is something that I'm generally in favor of. I appreciate you presenting this to us. My question is, you mentioned this sunsetting when the virus is no longer an issue. Essentially, we're solving for the problem that everybody's, from home. Do you either have a milestone that you'll be looking for us to reach, or is there a date by which we would revisit this? It's like, okay, let's revisit this in 6 months or a year or whatever, and determine whether it still makes sense. Do you have a sense of what the time or what would trigger us bringing this up again?
Well, the reason that we made it a monthly pass is we don't see it going on for 6 months or a year, because then we would just tell them they could buy a regular day pass. So we just, I don't know when people are going to go back downtown. I don't know when, people are going to start commuting again. Most of the people that, it appears to me from the complaints we're getting, is that most of the people that live downtown actually drive their car someplace else to go to work, okay, it's during the day. And so it's not like they take the train to Manhattan, so they walk down to the train station, or I'm sure they don't, someone that lives downtown does not buy a train station tag, which is more expensive than the regular muni parking passes. But what we're trying to do is make it so if somebody comes in, I have constantly getting phone calls on, I want to renew my muni tag. We have not done it as of we did some in March, and then that came to a complete halt after that. So it's really a decision that's going to be made. Is there are people that have paid for tags, the people that paid in January and February that have legitimate tags. And so do we just say to people, park wherever you want to, or do we start putting some focus back on putting a little bit of controls down there with the parking? That's the question.
Thank you, Sue, for this. So I have a couple of questions, and obviously, this is another situation that that we can help our community, ease their burden and what this whole situation has become. So, and this is sort of like to put into a balance area. So you mentioned that there are people that have overnight parking, that they leave there the whole day, and there's other people that have a day parking that try to find spots, and there is not that many left. Do we have a number of how many overnight parkings do we have right now on those lots?
We have it. We do have a number. I apologize. I don't have it with me. We did put that together because we put it together as part of our program where we look at the reestablishing the whole muni parking. There are more tags out there than there are spots, especially in the downtown area.
So this is sort of the struggle that I'm having on this one, and I'm in favor of trying to help our community which way, whatever we can. The difficult part to me is, if I'm going to an essential business, that there are some of them that are open downtown,
right?
And I'm not going to be there for 20 minutes, maybe a half an hour or an hour, and in this, if there's not that much parking, and if we allow all the people to park there, that they're not supposed to park in there in a regular day, they're not supposed to be there. So it kind of limits the parking area. So that's the difficult part that
I think the thing that we have to do is we have to decide if enforcement is going to start again.
And that's another difficult decision for us to make, obviously. So, and what is that?
Especially since your essential businesses that are downtown are complaining that people are just staying at the meters all day.
Correct. Have you talked to the chief? Has the chief given input on the whole situation and what we're doing on something like this?
I've talked to him because we did have a situation. I think Bill Garrison. I think we spoke, but no, we spoke about overnight hardship parking the other day, and I'm not sure where they stand. So I think that's something that has to be taken into consideration here. Is what is the police? You know, what are you going to do moving forward with that too?
Yeah, because even if the board agrees to say we want to do this, a month-to-month situation of $23, because then it becomes, well, I have a day pass that I already paid at the beginning of the year, and now I don't have a spot to park. What does that mean? As you mentioned, we do sell more than what we have the space in there. So it's like, how do we balance this whole thing?
And we have people that buy quite a few spots, passes, meeting passes too.
Correct.
So it's a tough call. It is a situation that we're trying to come up with some creative solutions to right now, so that we can concentrate on putting together our other program that we want to do with the muni lots in the future. And right now it might be 10 phone calls a day. Oh, we are like a switchboard right now. So yeah.
And I don't want to speak from the rest of my colleagues, but would it be fair for us to say we can have this conversation next week, or maybe try to get some feedback from the chief? Because as you mentioned, it's like at some point it has to be some sort of enforcement if that's the way we want to do it. So I think just for us to get a better understanding of what it looks like, I would like to have a conversation with the chief as well, if you think that's appropriate too. I mean, because both, we have to work.
Police commissioner, so it's always
Yeah.
appropriate.
Manny, we have reviewed all of this with the police department, and Sue, unless I'm mistaken, all the conversations, Kevin was on board with this. This is not a heavy lift for him. So
the enforcement.
Yeah, no, he did not have a problem with the enforcement. So we absolutely have been discussing this and all matters of parking with the chief. So he was not concerned about this.
So, I don't know where you want to go with this, but we thought of it as a solution to a situation that exists now. That yes, everything came to a screeching halt, and yes, we all paused. And how long are we going to continue to pause? So, on everything. Trying to be.
Well, I would love to hear what the rest of my colleagues think about this. I think the solution, it definitely could work, but it becomes an enforcement part, and how does that work?
As long as the enforcement takes place, I have no problem with moving forward with this. Eventually this is going to come to an end, but as the clerk says, I think they've come up with something creative, and I think it should be put in place.
Okay, I was actually listening to the meeting. I'm sorry, I was sort of disappeared for a moment. And I just want to circle back to one of the questions that Rika had, which is, how do we know when to renew this, continue it, discontinue it? And so I wonder, we've got a start date of June 1st.
Right.
And then everybody would just get
proposed start date, right.
Yeah. The recommendation is a start date for June 1st. And I guess this isn't what we would be doing is just establishing, from a process perspective, forgive me if you said this and I wasn't listening carefully enough. We just passing a resolution and updating the fee schedule to allow for this. This is not legislation, correct?
Not legislation. It is the $23 is taking the 12-month fee and dividing it. So that's what we stayed within the fee schedule too. So
okay, but I mean, but wouldn't we have to modify the fee schedule? Because does the fee schedule?
It does not call for a, Stuart, it doesn't call for a monthly pass right now.
The fee schedule does not. The code talks about, renewed annually. So there's a little disconnect between the code and the fee schedule on that.
Well, because of the fact that they have broken it down, so that, different people can forward things.
So I guess the question is, we're still in this state of emergency. This is an effort to address the immediate concerns. If the board is in agreement that this is an effective way to address the immediate concerns, is this something that we can put forward without it having to be, multi-week decision making with public hearings and such for a code update? Can it be something that we just next week could say, we are establishing the monthly day muni parking pass at a rate of $23 a month. This is the process by which people can apply for it. This is how it would work from an enforcement perspective. And we would have the chief there with us next week so he could weigh in person. And we could certainly speak with him in the interim to better understand how he sees this going. Then my question, getting back to what Rika was saying, is if the kickoff date for the program is proposed to be May 13th and then effective June 1st, does it make sense to, Stuart, sometimes we put you'll see something sunsets at a certain date by which the elected body would then need to either renew it, extend it, or allow it to sunset. Does that make sense in this case?
Since you're treating it as, let's say, a quasi-emergency, I think you would want to do that because I understand the village is still under its own state of emergency. But if an emergency order were to be issued based upon that, emergency orders are only good for 5 days to be constantly renewed. So that creates its own issue. So you could do that, but I think you have to basically put either a number of days or a date certain by which this ends. In light of what the circumstances are, or that it's reviewed again by the board on a particular date. You could do it that way. But either way, so that this is a finite program for a finite period of time.
I think that makes sense. So then, do you have a recommended either sunset date by when we review it and extend it, or allow it to say it served its purpose, we're in a different phase now and this is no longer necessary? Is there it's so hard to know, but since we really are just establishing a date for review, if it's starting on June 1st, we're pretty sure we're not going to be up to phase 4 anytime before the end of the summer. So do we want to say a September 1st review, or is that too soon? What do people think?
My feeling is that when Madam Clerk said that, well, it's we're talking about a matter of months. If this were the last 6 months or a year or more, then we would be moving toward that. My recommendation would be 6 months, because that feels like the right amount of time.
Okay, so that would be December 1st. It would sunset by December 1st, or be reviewed at December 1st.
And if circumstances changed, we could always come back to you and say, we feel it's time to,
this is a terrible idea. It's undermining everything we thought it would do. We're going to undo it. We still have that ability because this is very much a clear intention for addressing an immediate short-term need. Right.
So can I also put in there, and I don't think it goes into the write-up, but to sort of quote Omar from before, what does success look like? So what does it'll work look like? Like I don't understand all the work involved in what we're solving for. I think it's a burden on the most vulnerable people in the community right now. So not something I'm crazy, and I think it's a lot of work for really not a whole lot of, there's so many other things I'd rather have people work on right now. So, but even if I'm outvoted on that, what I need to understand is what does success look like? Like, what do we come back to in a few months? What data points are we looking for that says, hey, you know what, this actually makes sense to continue? Because I don't get a sense that we're even ticketing anybody now, legal or not. Don't really know how many calls are being made and by whom. Like, what is it that we're looking for that says, hey, you know what? This was a really great idea. Like, this worked. We do more of it. We do less of it. We stop it now. We continue it now. What are those like 3 data points or X data points so that we know this works? Enforcement has to be also discussed, because we can't have all these conversations and then we do all of this and the staff does all this work and enforcement doesn't occur. It's in, you know, that's not okay either. That's why I think Manny said, did the chief look into this? What is the input there? So we'll hear from him next week. That's fair enough. So what does success for this look like? That
I
we
think
would
that
make a decision.
I think if we give one person a comfort that they can park their car legally downtown during the day while they're stuck at home working from home, that is a success story. Because people are stressed. You brought it up before. People are exhausted. They're stressed out. They're moving their cars in the morning so that they don't, who knows when enforcement's going to take place. So if we have the chief say that we're going to start enforcing muni parking, meter parking, and start enforcing that stuff now so that the businesses can slowly start opening, or the essential businesses that are open can actually get people to come to their door, because we're supposed to be doing curbside service. I think that the success of this is if we make one person, 10 people, 100 people comfortable that they can work from home downtown right now and say, listen, I don't have to put out a lot of money. I have to put out $23 so I can park for the month during the day. I think that's the success story myself. And
So, just for clarification, these buildings are typically, the people parking here are living literally on Main Street. They're in the buildings on Main Street,
Right.
condos on Main Street, that, you know, where they don't have their own parking.
on Main Street.
And predominantly, they are people who are working from home now.
Right.
So,
Right.
so I think that's just to clarify who this is serving. The enforcement issue, again, was discussed with Chief Sylvester on this. We would not have brought it forward if that was going to be an issue. So this was discussed with him. I do believe that enforcement is going to start rolling out, because we are getting to the point where people are coming back to work, and as restrictions lift, we're going to have to start enforcing again, and that is going to start being phased in. We're already having a lot of problems from not enforcing overnight parking. So this is all imminent.
Yeah. You know, we've had.
Okay. So that answered my question. I mean, that's fine. I'm just concerned about, you know, not a success story, but again, to Omar's point, like when we make decisions, we need to sort of delineate what we're looking at and start being more data driven so that we understand what we're doing. I'm actually in favor of not charging anybody. I mean, I'm on the other extreme here. It isn't a question. It's a question of don't bother, because it is a burden. And I know $23 over 6 months probably is not a lot. I'm trying to make it easier so there's no ticketing and no, half the businesses are closed. I guess they'll open up. Anyway, I made my point. I'm trying to totally lift this and make it totally easy for people at the cost of our own revenue stream, and I do appreciate that. But that's what I'm saying.
But it's also the cost of people that have these tags or that are parking downtown trying to go to the essential businesses. Mm-hmm. So there's a catch-22 there. You know, it has both sides.
Okay.
Okay, so it sounds like we are going to want to have something to vote on for next week, and if there's more questions and things people want to clarify next week, we'll be able to do it then before we actually cast any votes. Is there any other details people want to make sure are included in a resolution for next week? Okay, good.
We put just one last thing is we put down that if it was a renewal, they could be done by phone. We can take the credit cards by phone, so it would be very easy for the people to do that too.
Excellent.
Yep.
All right. Then next up is Thank you, Clerk Donnelly. You're welcome to stay. I don't know that you're involved in any of the other items. I don't think you are.
I thank you all. Thank you all. It was a lovely evening, very informative. I want to say that presentation was outstanding. So thank you very much and good night.
Good night.
All right.
Madam Clerk. Next up, we have,
Hey, Victoria, I know we're all working from home, but it's 10:10. We've been on since 7:30. Can we do a 5-minute break? So we're not sort of coming and going.
Sure.
I mean, it's a Zoom meeting. It's sort of weird, but
We won't be able to stop the recording, but yeah,
yeah.
if people want to take a 5-minute break, we can all just regroup and talk about the Youth Bureau in 5 minutes.
Is that all right? I don't want to, I mean, I could leave on my own. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay.
on the list is local law number 4, the Youth Bureau. So now that we have gotten the county agree, it's time to take the next step with the village as we progress to establishing a Youth Bureau here in Ossining. So with that, I will hand it over to my colleagues, Corporation Counsel Kahan and our Recreation Superintendent, Bill Garrison. Thank you.
Thank you, Village Manager. Folks, this is proposed local law 4, which had been briefly discussed before when we talked about the Youth Bureau. Bill and I had worked on this. This is based on some of the other ordinances. Pretty much, I think it's in large part upon the Portchester section. The current proposed local law it would be an amendment to Chapter 190, which is Parks and Recreation. But it's my understanding that the Youth Bureau is actually going to be a separate entity, not part of Parks, but would be located in the rec building. So we can put it in its own chapter rather than being a part of a particular chapter. That's really neither here nor there. The local law goes through what the responsibilities of the executive director would be, the responsibilities of the local youth board. Most of this comes directly from the state regulations dealing with state statutes dealing with the youth board. We propose 15 members, and 2 of them would be under the age of 21. And when the board first comes into existence, the proposal would be that 5 would sunset out in 1 year, or 5 would have a 1-year term, 5 would have a 2-year term, 5 would have a 3-year term. And then after that, the terms would be 3 years, but that way we don't have everybody leaving at the same point. And Bill, I'll hand it to you for now.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, as we were saying, this is the next step. So in order for us to move forward and go in the process of hiring an executive director and working with the Civil Service of Westchester County, we have to get the approval from the Ossining Village Board. Otherwise, Civil Service is not going to entertain any of our requests for creating these job titles. And as we know that the county met last week and they gave the approval, so this is just the next step. In the law, it kind of outlines exactly what the role of the executive director is, how they report to the village manager, and what the board and that role is as well.
Okay, Rika, I know you were at, you virtually attended some of the county meeting where this was discussed, and Karen and Bill were there as well. It is big news for Ossining to be undertaking this effort, and it was obviously underway for a long time before we got into the situation we're in right now. And now we're just talking about the process for how do we actually move forward. Rika, I see you've unmuted yourself. Do you want to weigh in at this time?
I think it's great. There was a unanimous vote. I think I mentioned in the past that it's the first time in 20 years. I just had some questions actually for Bill. So tell me again, and I understand that this has not been done in 2 decades. So I'm sure whatever rules are in place are best practices plus, laws from whatever time frame. So that's great that we have that barometer. Question for you or for Stuart, I don't know who to ask this. If I read it correctly, so it's a board. So there must be an executive board, like a CEO and a secretary and all that. Is that correct?
I believe there is a president that correct me if I'm wrong, Stuart, that the mayor or the manager deems to be the president of the board.
The chair
Right, so
of the
that's-
youth board, that's correct.
Chair of the youth
Right,
board.
that's
Okay.
right. So what are we being asked for tonight? Because the structure of the board, I get the number, and the number could be from anything to anything. So you've chosen 15 because, I read the material. It's probably just about the right number. Based on other success stories or other programs, and it sounds like about right. And sure, why not? 15 sounds good. But the structure and the appointment of is actually very important in a forum like this. We're also a unique village in the relation with village manager and board trustee. And I believe that the other places where there are youth boards predominantly are cities, actually. So I just want an understanding. Do I even need to know this now? Like, who decides on the board? How is that, like, legally? Like, who decides who's secretary and who's chairman and, that kind of stuff. I get the rest of it. I just don't understand that part of it. Like, what is the board's involved? What's a BOT? Or is the only thing we're being asked for today is so that so that you can go and hire the 2 people that we budgeted for, we have to say yay to that. So is that all we're being asked for? I mean,
No, you're going to have to pass a local law that basically puts this local youth bureau into effect. Without the local law, the county's not going to allow us to proceed with the position.
okay, so that's the 2 positions. And who's appointing the 15 people?
The Board of Trustees.
Really?
That's by law? Or is
Usually
that the
by-
law
by-
we're writing?
Well, by charter, it would normally be the mayor.
I went by what other localities have done. If you wish to change that, you certainly may.
Okay, so that's not by law. That's a part of like just the way we decided on, or you're not decided, you're recommending. So this is a recommendation because I'm trying to understand the difference between what New York State law requires. And I'm not arguing here. I'm not arguing between 15 or 19 or 21. I think somebody has 21 members. I'm not arguing or negotiating. I'm trying to differentiate actual state law as regards and recommendations based on practices, et cetera, et cetera.
Something should be kept in mind. What you're creating here is and it's got to be very clear, a local youth bureau. You're not creating a youth bureau because currently the way the statute is worded, under the statute for a youth bureau, that refers to municipalities, but that's only a city or a county. Local youth bureaus are basically villages. Now, that statute has actually been amended, but that amendment will not go into effect for, I think, another 1 to 2 years. So all you're creating is what's called a local youth bureau. It has regulations through the state. It has certain, but it's important to note, you're not creating a youth bureau. So you need to, the nomenclature is important here because it's specifically in the statute called a local youth bureau. And
okay,
that's
why that's exactly at the crux of my questions, Stuart. So I thank you for that because we really are designing it based on the fact of what it is. It's not by law, by state law, because it's not part of that.
That's correct. There are some provisions in state law regarding the local youth bureau, and there are also similar state regulations that are in there. But a lot of it is, frankly, understand, Portchester has a youth bureau. The reason they do is that back in the 1980s, when they created it, basically when the youth bureaus were put into effect by the state, they grandfathered in all the other youth bureaus that already existed. But
Right.
then created the distinction between what is a youth bureau and what's a local youth bureau. And what we're creating is a local youth bureau.
Right. So I just wanted the trustees to understand that, because that, you've educated me, but I also had a sense that this is not mandated. You know, there's no clear-cut mandate about how it should look, who would, you know. So I think we just need to make sure we design it correctly from the get-go and understand what our role is here. Plus
Now,
my questions.
the one thing I should point out is that where in the proposal where it has, for example, responsibilities of the executive director and duties and responsibilities of the local youth board, those actually come out of the state regs. Now, some of them are just for youth bureaus, so you could say that you could change things, but basically I figured because they're already there for the youth bureau, there's no reason that you can't put it in for the local youth bureau, and the state regs don't say you can't. So essentially, if you want to call it, cut and paste it out of the state regs and put it directly into here.
Okay. But because of the way we're charted, I think the mayor is actually correct. That did not come up in the county legislative thing. What I did learn there is cities are just different. And in the history of the youth bureaus and the nomenclature actually is different. And some of them are virtual and some of them are in big buildings and some of them have huge budgets and some of them are one-person operations. And they all do sort of different things and some of them have been closed up. And so there isn't like it's not like a template. We're creating it, and that's a good thing. I think it's great for our village. I think in some cases we're unique and others we're not. So I wanted the trustees to sort of focus on this because I think it's important that we understand that. And so you're making a recommendation. We could have whole discussions about whether it should be 15 or 16 or 21, or we could just say, yeah, that sounds about right. And sort of go through the different things. What you need now is law to be passed for the county's sake so we can move forward.
That is correct. In order to create the position of executive director, the county would need approved legislation.
So then what's being, I'm sorry, Rika, I thought you were done.
No, I'm done. I'm just.
Okay. Then what you're suggesting is we should be calling for a public hearing and moving this forward.
You would have to, but again, as we've basically put all our public hearings on hold at this point until we can have an actual public hearing. Well, I think we'll get more guidance from the governor in the next couple of days because we're rapidly approaching the June 1st date when you could not have in-person public hearings. I expect that will be extended down here, but we'll have to wait and see. We'll probably hear something, I would think, by the end of the week.
So then we wouldn't yet be calling for a public hearing. This is a discussion, so we have the draft ready to go and teed up.
Right, that's exactly right. And the question is if there's any changes you want to make. As I said, one would be to have this as a freestanding chapter in the code, not under the not under the Parks and Recreation, but any other changes you think would be warranted, we're happy to make.
Great. Then I guess what I'd like to understand, if you can answer it without us going into too much detail, because it is 10:30 at night, but now that I'm understanding the difference, that this is a local youth bureau as opposed to a youth bureau, is there a simple explanation as to what we're not getting out of it as a local youth bureau, or what's better about it? And then, assuming that there's something we don't get out of being a local youth bureau, when we have the ability in a year or two to become a youth bureau, a freestanding, whatever, independent youth bureau like so many others that cities have, would we want to revert to that? And it seems like because you've been borrowing a lot of the youth bureau language, that will be well positioned to be able to make that transition.
From what I'm reading, I don't think that will make a difference I suspect that what's going to happen is anything that was a local youth bureau will ultimately be considered a youth bureau. I mean, when it changed. For some weird reason, the way they define it, and maybe because of how state funding was done, but municipality explicitly excluded villages and towns. So that's just how it was written.
Okay. Great. So then, does anybody else have anything more to comment on or ask about on this topic? There you go, Mamie.
I do. Just a quick question, I guess. So whenever we pass this and we go through this whole motion, I guess Karen and maybe Steve for personnel be able to help me with this. I know Steve is not here, but usually in situations like this, there's a list, sure, that we can pull in for the director's position. Do we know that there's a current list right now, or do we have to wait because if we do go through this whole thing and we establish everything, and then we just have to wait to try to figure out who's going to fill that position at some point if there's no list, or we may have to go out of that and look somewhere else to find someone that would be appropriate for this position?
I believe that because the way that we're doing it, we're not bound to a union list. So it's not clear to me that whether there's, I think we have some latitude to go out of the county system. It's not a union position.
It sounded to me like they were developing criteria to actually create these positions for the village. In which case there could not be a list because it's a brand new title for civil service.
Yeah, so I don't think, but there's different ways, like had we set it up differently, it would have to be a union position and we would have to go off a list. I don't think that the way we're setting it up, that we are restricted to who we can hire. Bill, do you have any input on that? It's not my understanding is we can hire based on real skills and need.
Yeah, for the executive director, there is not a competitive list. For the other position, it will depend on how we define that position and the job description that we come up with. The county may look at that and then apply what we're looking at towards an established title, which may or may not be competitive. But for the executive position, there is not a competitive list.
Right.
So thank you. If there's not a competitive list, but there is some guidelines of what the criteria they are, or should be at least, sure, because we're not going to.
There definitely will be.
Yeah, we're not going to hire someone that knows about construction to run, the youth bureau, for example.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Unless that's their hobby.
I resemble that remark.
Sorry. I was thinking about doing architectural, but it will be me. So I was like, maybe I'll go for
the quality is for the job description. We're looking for somebody who has obviously experience in youth services and also somebody with a really strong grant writing capacity. Those would be for this job. Those are what typically dictate. Those are the primary qualities that you want to, or talents that you want to find.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Rika, you unmuted, so I thought you were going to say something, but maybe not. Did
No.
Omar? No. Okay. Omar, did you want to comment on this, or are we all good? Okay. Anybody else have any more comments or questions about the Youth Bureau at this time?
Omar's frozen.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay.
No, we're all good.
Okay, good. All righty then. Where are we, Karen? What's next?
Well, next up is a proposal from Tara for, as you remember a while back before the virus hit, we were talking to Tara about a trap, neuter, release program because of the SPCA being closed for renovations, and they're still having some trouble, I think now, not only are with the renovations, but also because of staffing issues and the virus. So we do want to bring back the proposal for the TNR. I'd like to turn this over to Corporation Counsel and Assistant Village Manager Zahach to talk about where we are with that.
Maddie, why don't you, because you've been talking with them more directly than I have, so if you could start. Thanks.
Of course. Good evening, Board of Trustees. So hopefully we can make this a pretty tight conversation. Just to give a little bit of context for folks who may be listening, The Village of Ossining has an annual contract with the SPCA to do a variety of things, but not included in that contract specifically is the TNR program. So that's something that's paid for a la carte on a regular basis. There are various approvals that go through the police department, per cat basis. Currently, the SPCA is still planning their renovations. They let me know that they are not going to be available to resume their TNR until at least the week of June 4th. So that puts us about 3 weeks away from that time. And of course, they can't necessarily guarantee that they're going to be ready to do it at that point. The folks from CPC had been in touch with Corporation Counsel and myself about a proposal from Tara. And basically what they're proposing is for $50 per cat, regardless of whether it's a spay or a neuter, they will perform the TNR services that the village usually contracts with the SPCA to do. Again, just for reference sake, the SPCA usually charges $40 for a neuter and $55 for a spay. So that comes to a blended rate of about $47.50 per cat, and Tara is looking to charge $50. So it is a bit of an uptick from what the village is used to paying. Hopefully this would not be a long-term arrangement, and the folks at CPC have graciously volunteered to take care of actually transporting the cats from Ossining to Tara. Tara is in Middletown, New York, so it's a bit of a hike. I know there had been some consideration of running a shuttle between Peekskill and Middletown, so perhaps it wouldn't be as big a hike for them. But regardless, that would not be anything that the village would need to contribute towards or participate in. Additionally, we had spoken with Chief Sylvester. The animal control officer is usually the person who's involved in TNR as far as site inspections are concerned. That officer has been deemed non-essential, but we are going to, if the board is interested in pursuing this, bring him back to work to do these site inspections. So that is all that I have, unless there are any questions.
Maddie, can you just, I know when we did this last week, we talked about what the average cat count was per week, and I think it's just good for context to have that.
Sure. I could only say from the invoices that I've seen, and perhaps Jamie Hoffman, because I know she was working on this program, substantially in years past. Most of the invoices that I've seen going through are maybe 10 or 12 cats at a time, but I'm not sure if that's on a weekly or a monthly basis. So perhaps she can give some context there.
I would say that that's accurate. I think it changes really at this time of the year when the cats seem to be pregnant, and then they bring them in and we give them, bless you, some extra opportunities to, or at least in the past, we would let them bring in the cats that are pregnant. It makes those kittens a lot more adoptable. If we can get them also, a part of the TNR is if the cats aren't far enough along, then they handle that situation as well. But if they are further along, then they adopt all of the whole animal out, all of the animals, not animals. So anyway. I hope that answers.
And just, Maddie, from a financial point of view, last time we spoke about this, I think it was 2-3 months ago, actually.
Mm-hmm.
The SPCA is not providing services because they're in renovation, and we were supposed to get money back from them. And one of the conversation was to use that money to pay Tara, right? Did we get any money back based on the contract since they've been closed?
I'm gonna ask Corporation Counsel to join me in this. So basically, when we had talked about it internally, my understanding was that the board was under the impression that the TNR service was bundled into the monthly payment, and because that is not the case, we did not seek a refund. Stuart, is that an
That's accurate? Because as you pointed out, Maddie, it's essentially an a la carte service on a per cat basis. So it's a separate and distinct fee from what we pay them on a monthly basis for their other services.
And what other services have they been providing while they're under renovation all this time?
I would not know.
Right, so if somebody's under renovation and they're not open, and we have a contract with them, I'm just trying to use that money to pay for some of this stuff. If they're closed and we have a contract, should we not be seeing a prorated refund if no work or services were provided?
I don't want to speak out of school. I would have to check with the executive director, Shannon, to just make sure that this is correct. But my understanding was that they weren't closed as a result of the renovation just yet. They were closed as a result of COVID. Is that accurate? I don't think they had begun their renovations yet. I think they were, getting ready to do that. I know, in fact, that they hadn't moved the TNR treatments under the animal hospital to Cortland, and they were getting ready to do that when the virus hit. But I could certainly circle back with Shannon and make sure that's the case.
I think that would be helpful, and maybe because this comes up, every time we talk about cats, maybe we can have a better understanding on, we do pay an annual fee for our relationship with the SPCA, and as is very clear now, that doesn't include the TNR. So it would be helpful for us to understand what does it include, what are the benefits that we're getting from the SPCA, which is a wonderful local organization, and I think they are operating just on a very scaled back way and by appointment only. The building's not empty, my understanding is, but that's neither here nor there. We still don't really, at least we elected officials, at least I can speak for myself, and it sounds like this is what Rika was asking as well, is what is the great benefit that we get from the whatever it is, $35,000, and that's a, very, very, not entirely confirmed number that I feel like it was something in that realm the last time we spoke about it. What
I
do
thought
we
it
get
was
for
like
that?
42,000, and every time we discuss this, we sort of go and wonder. I mean, we pay one of the highest in any of the communities around here. It's just a question of what is it exactly we're paying for. So I think that's a good idea. Right. And Maddie also asked another question, right? There was that, and there was Maddie, you had two points actually. Yeah, sorry. You had actually asked a question, and
yeah, I think really what the question is would the board be comfortable entering into a short-term agreement with Tara? This is again the organization in Middletown, to cover Osening's cats for the next month or so until SPCA is able to resume the TNR operation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't.
Yes,
I think they're the only ones around. There was a lot of research done on them too.
Right. No. Yes, and we've talked about, and I think it's really a testament to the dedication of the volunteers from the Cat Protection Council that it wouldn't cost us anything to be doing the transporting to something in Middletown, which is obviously much less convenient than Briarcliff. So thank you to them for their partnership in really making this possible. I know it's something that they very much believe in, and we are very much supportive of it. The trap, neuter, return program, and I think we do need to get it back up and running. And I will just say, I'm sure that whatever provisions have been made to bring this person who was deemed the officer who was deemed to be non-essential to be able to come back, great. I'm glad that that's possible. And I know that the rules are changing all the time, so I'll just trust that we're doing that in a way that is in compliance with all of the regulations for essential workers.
It may be, because I think it is becoming a health and safety issue, and evidently cats were running amok in the library this week. So we
just one.
Just one got in. So but that was probably one too many for the library. So we'll make sure.
Well, that seems like an easy justification then. I'm glad that we were able to address it in a maybe not proactively, somewhat reactively, before too much time goes on.
but we're beginning to understand the magnitude of the potential problem. So before one gets to 16 Croton, we'll get it under control.
Okay, so then there'll be something for us for next week then.
Yes, and in addition, I will ask Shannon to prepare a memo for the Board of Trustees to send around as well.
Super, thank you.
Great.
Okay. I think we're almost done, Karen, right? One more thing?
We have one more item for tonight. We have our IMA with Westchester County Emergency Services. And I will turn this over to Corporation Counsel Kahan to discuss what I believe is a relatively short item.
Yes, thank you, Village Manager. Folks, this is a contract or license agreement with the county. They will be providing and installing and at no cost to the village equipment into many of our fire department vehicles. I discussed this today with Chief DeCruz, and he is fine with the agreement, and wants and would urge the board to approve a resolution that allows the village manager to sign this agreement. Again, the county would be getting grants, and they will be purchasing this. There is an appendix here which lists all the vehicles that will be getting the equipment. and in terms of the fire department. And it's basically from the village's perspective, it's basically a win-win because it gets installed and it gets paid for by someone else.
Sounds good to me. Anybody else have questions or comments?
Yeah, I do. What kind of equipment?
All different types of radio equipment.
It's a new trunking system that they're going to throughout the county, and interconnects with your local, like your Armonk with Greenwich. You know, it's inter-county, interstate. So it's a new system. It's been coming, and it just benefits us in the long run.
No, that's fantastic. And is the county going to maintain it over time, or is it just like it's a gift now and then we'll see how it works and it becomes our property?
We're responsible to maintain it, and if it goes past the warranty period and it breaks, we have to repair it.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
I do have I guess quick questions on this. So and maybe Bob, you probably know a lot more on this one too. So this equipment is going to go to all the fire.
No.
No, it goes to the 3 chiefs' cars, all the apparatus, I believe, right, Stuart? I read that.
Right. It does not go to the new bus, and it does not go to one of the deputy chief's cars.
Yeah, there's a deputy chief's car that will not get it, and the bus command center will not get it because it's not on the list from the county.
Okay. So now my second question will be: this is a new system. Do we have to upgrade the antennas and everything else, or any other additional equipment to support this equipment?
Oh, are you talking about for us for building wise, or are you talking about on vehicles?
Both.
Well, I would imagine that it's all one package. You know, whatever the wavelength is. I could be talking out of school right now, but I think that's part of what comes with the package. If there's a different or another type of antenna that has to be used, that'll come with the package. They're not gonna put a radio in that you can't transmit out of, so they'll be responsible for that. And it might very well work on the antennas that are on the cars.
What about the receivers? What about the receivers around the village? Yeah.
As far as what's in the vehicle?
No. We have repeaters. Sure, we have repeaters for the antennas so they can work properly around our municipality. So do we have to upgrade any of that stuff?
I don't know about that. I don't think so. I think most of the repeaters are on the low band. All right, this is a different type of frequency. So the county's broken up in sectors. You know, like there's like we're sector 12, and there's a battalion chief for sector 12, and we would work off of trunk 12, which we have now. But now that could all change. They might change it to trunk 24. I don't know, you know, but you'll work off of that. But we also have the option, like if we go to mutual aid to Peekskill, right now that's 17. So when we get in the truck, we switch over to 17 so we can communicate with the battalion chief as to where they need us to go, direct us that way. So the whole idea is not to tie up the actual 4626, which is the low band frequency of the county. So that's what this trunking system is.
Okay. Now, is anything with the police department?
No.
Okay.
No, we'll still dispatch. We will still dispatch like we are now. We will not go to the county to be dispatched, you know, unless the call goes to the county first before, you know, which is 1 every 50 calls, maybe the county dispatches us out, or on a mutual aid assignment, the county will dispatch us out. But we still dispatch from police headquarters, and we will still dispatch over the same frequency.
So I guess my last question is, in a way, I guess, what is the warranty period on equipments like this?
Stuart?
I have no idea, Manny. I'm sorry.
It's okay. No problem.
I
mean,
read
it's like a great concept and improvements to our fire department, you know, but nothing comes for free sometimes. So we just have to keep that in mind at some point of time where we have to, you know, do hopefully we don't have to do any upgrades at our end in our infrastructure to support any of that stuff later on. So,
No, I agree, but if it saves one life, it's worth the price of poker.
of course, always. Yeah.
All right. Well, you can see that this is a village that has accepted some lovely gifts in the past and wondered if that was the best idea possible without considering the future ramifications. That said, we also invest a lot of money into our fire department, though not in the salaries of all the men and women who serve in that capacity. So we are grateful to be able to not have to spend money, at least up front, and it sounds like it will be beneficial. So that was a lengthier conversation on accepting a free gift than you might have anticipated, but hopefully we'll be ready to move this forward next week. The only person we didn't hear from was Trustee Lopez. Are you good on this? Are you frozen? Okay. Okay. All righty.
I'm not frozen, no. I'm good.
All right. Is there anything else on our agenda this evening, or do we have a motion to go into executive session for matters of personnel related to specific persons?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. We will see you in exec. It will be brief.
Hopefully I can
Okay.
get on.
See everybody
Famous
next
last
week in
words.
this virtual world.